Thank you, colleagues. The question is that Amendment 38 be agreed to, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Jamie Hepburn for a point of order.
Unfortunately, the app wasn't working. I'm going to have to cast a vote for myself, no, and also on behalf of Richard Lochhead as his proxy, no.
Thank you, Mr Hepburn. We'll ensure those are recorded. Call Michelle Thompson for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Inexplicably, my application closed me suddenly and I was unable to vote. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Thompson. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 38 in the name of Maurice Golden is yes 48, no 64. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We move to Group 2, Circular Economy Strategy. I call amendment 31 in the name of Mark Ruskell, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Mark Ruskell to move amendment 31 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This is a very large group of amendments, but I'll try and be as succinct as Maurice Golden was. So I'd like to move Amendment 31, and I'll speak to 33 as well initially. These add a requirement for ministers to set out improvement plans for minerals that are critical to the green energy transition. This includes minerals such as copper, lithium, nickel, iron, vital for renewables and battery technologies that we're going to be using in the decades to come. And of course, members will be aware that mining these materials has got serious social and environmental consequences, and that the demand for these materials is going to grow very rapidly. So given their importance, it's vital that the Scottish Government gives consideration as to how reuse and recycling of these minerals across the energy sector can be developed. Now, we're already seeing focus on the onshore wind sector, on repowering turbines. There's great supply chain economic opportunities around this, but it does need planning, it does need leadership from government. Now, I move to a similar set of amendments at stage 2. I thank the Minister for discussing this issue again ahead of stage 3. I recognise that primary legislation may not be the most appropriate place for this complex issue, but I do seek assurances from the Minister today about how these critical ministers will be addressed in the Scottish Government's work on energy policy, in particular the Energy Strategy Just Transition Plan. So, moving on, developing a circular economy is key to tackling twin crises of both climate change and biodiversity loss. And throughout the passage of the bill and in evidence, we've heard about the importance of not just reducing the amount of resources that we consume, but also reducing the carbon emissions associated with goods, products and services that we all need and we all use. Now, an economy in which we not only reduce the amount of materials we consume, but also reduce their carbon impacts, is something that we should always be focused on. And I'm grateful to the Minister for the constructive discussions that we've had on this matter as well. So, following those discussions, we've lodged amendments 40, 41 and 42 to ensure that the characteristics of a desirable economy set out in section 1.3 of the bill include not only reducing consumption of products and materials, but also to reducing their whole life cycle carbon emissions. Now, this is going to help to lay the foundations for those deep transformations of the economy that we need to see over the next 20 years as we start to head towards net zero, and urge members cross-party to support those amendments. Now, moving to Amendment 43. During discussions with many stakeholders, I've heard about the importance of education and skills, and in its Stage 1 report, the NZEC Committee highlighted the importance of behaviour change, and I was pleased that at Stage 2, the Scottish Government lodged an amendment to ensure this was taken into account in developing a circular economy strategy. Amendment 43 expands on this to ensure that education and skills are also specifically taken into account by ministers in development of the strategy. And, Presiding Officer, the OECD estimates that globally we're going to have 18 million new jobs in the circular economy by 2040. So, our young people really do need access to the skills to access these new jobs. And there is a precedent here that in the Irish Circular Economy Act there's also a strong focus on education. So I ask members to support Amendment 43. A further issue that's been regularly raised with me by stakeholders is the importance of action to move up the waste hierarchy, in particular strengthening the commitment to reuse schemes such as refill and take back. Now, my final amendment in this group, Amendment 44, inserts into Section 1 a requirement that in preparing a circular economy strategy, Scottish ministers must have regard to the role that reuse, refill and take-back schemes have in contributing to a circular economy. I'd like to thank the Minister again for our discussions on this matter. I think the Minister is going to be getting a lot of thanks this afternoon for very positive cross-party discussions we've had throughout Stage 2 and 3. And I welcome the commitment from the Minister to develop a product stewardship plan within the draft waste and circular economy route map, which will take these issues fully into account. Now, I believe that Amendment 44 ensures that these issues will be actively considered. I note Morris' amendment has made an amendment to my amendment, 44A, which adds in detail around how such schemes would prioritise products and packaging. But I do believe it's important to ensure that there's flexibility in how all manner of potential reuse and refill take-back schemes are developed. So I think it's important government has that flexibility, so I urge members just to support Amendment 44 as it stands without the amendment to the amendment. Presiding Officer, just offer some brief remarks, given that I'm opening this group, on some of the other amendments in the group. Claire Adamson's 45, Bob Doris's 73 add in important requirements to ministers to have regard to workplace safety and the international impacts of policies when preparing the strategy. Happy to support those. Also support Monica Lennon's 95, requiring reusable items to be prioritised over single-use items in the strategy wherever possible. I know it's not going to be possible to do that in every case, but wherever possible, that's important. And again, that's supported by a lot of NGOs, and I hope the Minister will consider supporting that. I'll also be supporting Maurice Golden's Amendment 98, which requires ministers to have regard to some critically important sectors that have come up in evidence, such as construction, when preparing the strategy. Finally, Presiding Officer, I have got some sympathy with amendments from both Maurice Golden, number 65, and Sarah Boyack, 93, on ensuring that waste is managed in Scotland rather than being shipped overseas. But I'm going to just listen to the Minister's arguments on these. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Sarah Boyack to speak to Amendment 93 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendment 93 in my name would place a requirement for the circular economy strategy to set out how the offshoring of waste would be reduced. At Stage 2, there was considerable support during our discussions on the bill for attempts to make sure that the offshoring of Scotland's waste is reduced as a result of this bill. If we look at the statistics, last year, published by SEPA, it was revealed that 6,500 tonnes of waste had been shipped overseas from Scotland between 2018 and 2022. So if this bill is to achieve a truly circular economy, this needs to stop, which is why it's essential that the strategy sets out the steps to reduce the offshoring of waste. I've seen this abroad. I've seen the impact of rubbish littering coastlines, and we need to make sure we do the right thing here. Amendment 96 in my name would strengthen the requirements the Scottish Ministers need to take into account when devising the circular economy strategy, and a number of these reflect the proposals in the purpose of a circular economy, and it's my expectation that including this amendment would make sure that the strategy takes these into account. I think in this section there are a raft of other really positive amendments. Most of the amendments by Mark Ruskell, Maurice Golden and Ben Macpherson. I think looking at issues like critical materials, the whole life cycle of carbon emissions, that's really important. The issues from Maurice Golden that highlight the need to make sure that key sectors of the economy are involved in this process to make sure we have a strategy that reduces the impact of waste. Construction, steel, plastics and textiles, not just good for our waste economy, but also good for our climate. And I think the points... Sorry, did somebody make an intervention? Yes, briefly.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank my friend for giving way on that point. She's making an excellent point to her amendment. Does she share my frustration at the government's lack of joined-up strategy on this, particularly around green steel, for example? We export enough steel to be self-sufficient in steel manufacturing, but there's no linkage back into, for example, the development of electric arc furnaces to actually ensure we have a proper circular use of steel in this country.
Sarah Boyack.
Yeah, just to clarify, this is not my amendment. I'm supporting Maurice Golden's amendment on this, but I very much agree with the point that Paul Sweeney makes. I think the amendment by Ben Macpherson is also really important in terms of highlighting the issues that we need to see addressed. And I think the points by Claire Adamson about consumer and workplace safety are absolutely critical and need to be supported. I know that my colleague Monica Lennon has now got a series of amendments, all of which are excellent, and I hope that colleagues will support. And I'm conscious of the fact that this is going to be a long debate. I'm not going to make a mini speech on every amendment. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, and I call Monica Lennon to speak to Amendment 94 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I agree with Sarah Boyack. We've got some really important amendments in this group. I won't speak to all of them, but I think Mark Ruskell, in opening the group, got off to a good start, particularly his amendment on critical minerals. As many have pointed out during the scrutiny of the bill, it is a framework bill, and that means that the main effects of the legislation will become apparent later after the publication of the secondary legislation and the strategy. So it is important and indeed crucial that we get things right at this stage, and that includes having the right requirements for the strategy on the face of the bill. So I think these amendments we've heard today are really important. My amendments 94 and 97 strengthen the bill's alignment with the Climate Change Act of 2009. At stage 2, the Scottish Government brought forward an amendment requiring ministers to have regard to the just transition principles set out in the Climate Change Act. However, this did not include all of the clauses in that Act which have specific requirements for the climate change plan, and these relate to employment, the regions and support for the workforce, businesses and communities. Key stakeholders, including the Just Transition Partnership and Friends of the Earth Scotland, agree with Scottish Labour that the definition of the just transition, as seen at stage 2, is too narrow. So amendments 94 and 97 will implement clauses 20 and 21 from section 35 of the Climate Change Act, and this is important because these clauses require the Scottish Government to consider how proposals and policies will affect different sectors and regions of the economy, support sectoral and regional developments, and a requirement to set out costs and benefits of policies. So I ask colleagues to back Amendments 94 and 97, to draw from the best practice in the Climate Change Act and to ensure that a transition towards a circular economy is a just transition. Amendment 72 requires the strategy to consider human rights and environmental impacts in supply chains. And I thank Friends of the Earth Scotland and Scottish Environment Link for supporting this amendment, and I thank the Minister for constructively engaging with me and Scottish Labour on this amendment following stage 2. During stage 2, the impact of policy in Scotland and other countries, particularly in terms of resource demand here and how that can impact other parts of the world, both in environmental and human rights contexts, especially for the Global South. That was discussed at length. The importance of due diligence in supply chains was highlighted many times. So Amendment 72 will strengthen the strategy's commitment to due diligence in supply chains, ensuring that we maximise the environmental and social benefits here and internationally. And I'm grateful to Matt Ruskell for his support for Amendment 95, which aims to strengthen the strategy with regards to promoting reuse. At stage one, we heard concerns that the bill was too recycling focused, and some people called it a recycling bill. And people were looking for more in terms of other aspects of the waste hierarchy, particularly on reuse. So I'm pleased that the Scottish Government has sought to address this further at stage 2 and provide more reassurance. Scottish Labour would like to see the bill go further to strengthen the provision in relation to the waste hierarchy. As I said, my Amendment 95, which is about reusable items being given priority over single-use items wherever possible, is backed by key stakeholders, including Scottish Environment Link Sustainable Economy Group, who have provided valuable expertise and scrutiny of this area. If I can move on briefly to talk about Amendment 74, so this seeks to, in terms of how the ministers prepare the circular economy strategy, they must have regard to encouraging equal opportunities and furthering the reduction of inequalities of outcome which result from socio-economic disadvantage. The Minister and I had some really good discussions where we agreed that we need to take a gender-sensitive approach when thinking about transitioning towards a circular economy. I'm not going to talk about nappies too much just now because that will come in a later group, but it was through our discussion about how an item, I know Douglas Lumsden's giggling, I'm sure he'll have lots to say later on this, but I think that's part of the point. We've seen there's been a wee bit of embarrassment about talking about items like nappies, and that led us into a discussion about some of the stigma and some of the gender aspects of this, which is maybe why we've not, in a moment, which is maybe why we've not seen enough policy development in this area. But I'm happy to give way to Douglas Lumsden. Douglas Lumsden.
Thank you. And it's certainly not any embarrassment about nappies. I'm just surprised that you weren't raising it sooner.
Monica Lennon.
I aim to surprise, but we will talk about that further on. But I think these amendments, or 74 speaks for itself, and I hope that everyone can support this tonight. And I'm really pleased to have worked closely with the Minister on this. And I'll just final word on Amendment 45 in the name of Claire Adamson. I think it is a really important amendment, as others have said. I know from my work chairing the cross-party group in construction, there's a lot of support for this. And in the interest of time, I will leave it there and hope colleagues support that amendment too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. And I call Maurice Golden to speak to Amendment 39 and all other amendments in the group. Mr Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Amendment 39 in my name is around a refillables promotion plan, which has proven environmental benefits, and it also links to Amendment 44 and 44A, which I'll come to shortly. Amendment 65 is an issue that during stage 2 I raised around managing waste locally. Doing so limits the impact of our waste in other countries, creates economic opportunity and reduces environmental impacts, for example, from transport of waste. Amendment 65 inserts into section 1(3), which sets out the desirable characteristics of a circular economy which Scottish ministers must have regard to, wording such that this includes an economy in which waste is managed in Scotland, if appropriate to do so. There will, of course, always be logistical and economic implications to take into account when managing waste, and I would like to thank the Minister for constructive engagement in developing an amendment which recognises the importance of managing waste in Scotland, if this is appropriate to do so. Amendment 98 is important in terms of highlighting the sectors of the Scottish economy which are material-based. It doesn't exclude other sectors, and I think a case can be made for others. But the ones I've mentioned, construction, 40% of emissions come from construction and our built environment. In terms of steel, the Scottish Energy Strategy and Just Transition Plan don't consider the material demand from these policies, and that needs to change. Looking at plastics, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have said there could be more plastic in the ocean by weight than fish by 2050. So clearly there's action there. But perhaps my favourite would be textiles, because it is very much a forgotten sector. The Zero Waste Scotland programme has been cancelled, reinstated, cancelled again before being reinstated, and it's clear there's not a comprehensive action plan. Now, the Scottish Government have consulted on parts of this, but there is nothing in this bill which represents a comprehensive action plan around textiles. And when we consider that around 30% of clothing in our wardrobes has not been worn for at least a year, as well as £140 million worth of clothing is sent to landfill each year in the UK, it's clear things need to change. And that's why I believe in terms of textiles we should be designing for circularity, implementing circular economy business models, closing the loop on materials, and finally encouraging consumer behaviour change. On to Mark Russell's Amendment 44. I think it's a positive one, but perhaps lacks teeth. My Amendment 44A seeks to rectify this by detailing consideration of how such schemes are rolled out, and it creates a deep understanding of these products and packaging options. There are a number of amendments in this group which I'm not going to cover individually, other than to say I'm generally positive and will listen to the case that is made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Golden. And I now call on Claire Adamson to speak to Amendment 45 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm going to limit my comments to Amendment 45. At Stage 2, I lodged a probing amendment on the challenges in the workplace and for consumers of electrical safety, and I put on record my thanks to Electrical Safety First, the Royal Society of Chemistry and other members of the Cross-Party Group on Accident Prevention and Safety Awareness for raising these concerns. And I was also heartened by the cross-party interest in the probing amendment. Amendment 45 has timely relevance given recent fires in the waste industry, and can I thank the Minister for working with me to ensure that safety considerations for both consumers and workplaces will be taken into account in the development of the strategy. And I would ask people to support Amendment 45. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now call on Bob Doris to speak to Amendment 73 and other amendments in the group. Mr Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. During Stage 2, there was an important discussion on the impacts of policy in Scotland and other parts of the world, in particular the impact on the global southward resource use here can have negative impact on communities and environments elsewhere. I would like to acknowledge the role of the Scottish Catholic International AIDS Fund in particular, and their role in highlighting these concerns. I would also like to recognise the input of several members across the Chamber in doing likewise. And I know Monica Laird and Sarah Boyack is raising these matters, particularly at Stage 2, and again we've heard some of that here this afternoon. And to the Minister for her positive and constructive discussions following Stage 2. Amendment 73 inserts a requirement for Scottish Ministers to have regard to the potential impacts of their circular economy policies in preparing the circular economy strategy. I would note, Presiding Officer, we've got a proud track record in Scotland in listening to those impacted directly by climate change internationally. COP26 established a Glasgow dialogue between parties, relevant organisations and stakeholders to address loss and damage associated with adverse impacts of climate change. Importantly, and this is why I put this on the record, I'm happy to have an intervention from Mr Simpson.
Graham Simpson.
Officer.
Thank Bob Doris for taking the intervention. I'm just curious to know how Bob Doris thinks we could measure the potential international impacts of circular economy policies here in Scotland. How does he think that could be done?
Bob Doris.
I'm not sure how that could be done, Mr Simpson. That's why the amendment doesn't call for us to measure it in any particular way, to have regard for that impact. So the precision is quite important, the amendment to allow you to support it, I would like to think, Mr Simpson. But what I was going to go on and say was that, importantly, the reason I mentioned COP26 in the Glasgow Dialogues is it gave visibility to the frontline communities and those most vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. And indeed, the Glasgow Dialogues were continuing in Bonn earlier this month. So my amendment, I believe, by having regard for the international impacts of our circular economy policies here in Scotland, embeds in our domestic policy landscape that visibility that we sought at COP26, and together with Amendments 75 and 76 by the Minister, which extends consultation requirements to persons which Ministers consider to have an interest in the strategy, including international organisations, will ensure that policies made here in Scotland take account of impacts overseas and ensure a just and fair approach to developing a more circular economy. And I urge members to support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr Doris. I now call on Ben McPherson to speak to Amendment 66 and other amendments in the group. Mr McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move Amendment 66 in my name. During the Stage 1 process, the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee heard significant evidence about particular sectors of our economy and waste-producing aspects of our society that will need to be considered and need to change in order for a circular economy, a more circular economy, to be realised, as well as individuals and communities taking action. And so, at Stage 2, I raised the issue of including priority sectors on the face of the bill, specifically in that amendment at Stage 2, construction, food waste and household waste. In particular, as has been noted by other members, construction accounts for around half of Scotland's waste. And so it's an important sector for us to focus on, and I'm grateful for the collaboration in considering these issues that I've received from Built Environment Forum Scotland, RICS and the Chartered Institute of Builders in Scotland. However, listening to the feedback carefully from the Minister at Stage 2, I very much appreciated the Scottish Government's arguments that highlighting specific sectors on the face of the bill does potentially limit future flexibility. And I was assured that in both developing and delivering its strategy, the Scottish Government is committed to making sure that these key sectors are addressed. And therefore, I don't think that Maurice Golden's Amendment 98 is appropriate in the same way that my amendment wasn't appropriate at Stage 2, because we need to give flexibility in the strategy to address all the main sectors. And I also am concerned that the sectors that are named in Amendment 98 by Maurice Golden are not defined in the way that I sought to define them or reference current legislation in my amendment at Stage 2, and lack of definition in these considerations could create difficulties. And so I was grateful to the Minister for engaging constructively on these points and the issues of major sectors, both at Stage 2 and since, and working with me to put forward an alternative approach in this Amendment 66, to instead set out a criteria that should be used when identifying priority sectors and systems for the circularity economy strategy. Amendment 66 introduces such a criteria, in particular linking priority sectors to climate change targets, life cycle carbon of goods, products and materials, maximising the value of a circular economy and wider environmental impact. And this also takes into account some of the issues raised by Mark Ruskell at Stage 2. So I believe that this Amendment 66 both strengthens and future-proofs the strategy in its development and delivery, and I urge members to support Amendment 66.
Thank you. I now call on the Minister to speak to Amendment 75 and the other amendments in the group. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think it's been a really good discussion. It was a good discussion at Stage 2 as well. And I want to start with Amendment 66 from Ben McPherson, because I think this provides a useful framework for some of my later points. Stage 2, there was a really detailed discussion on the merits or otherwise of including specific sectors or systems in the face of the bill. And I understand the temptation to put them in the bill. But as I said then, it remains my firm view the circular economy economy strategy must be future-proofed and allow for flexibility, given that what's a priority now may not be in the future. New sectors and technologies may emerge, and which would then not be captured by the legislation. However, Ben McPherson has set out very eloquently today about providing a set of criteria which should be used when identifying those priority systems and sectors for our priority action, and that allows a consistency of approach without hindering that ability to adapt and react.
Maurice Golden.
I appreciate the Minister's comments regarding mentioning specific sectors, but I wonder if the Minister could outline to the Chamber what work has been conducted to create more circularity in the textile sector.
Minister.
Well, we'll start with myself, the fact that I have this charity shop suit on today. I hope Mr Golden is wearing a second-hand piece of clothing as well. No, but I mean, I think textiles has been something that has been mentioned throughout this whole debate, and it's one of the things that is a priority. Fast fashion. I don't think people actually realise just how polluting fast fashion actually is, and how much it means that it actually gets into our water courses as well. That would be a priority sector for us. Of course, we're coming on to talking about amendments later on about our international responsibility as well, given that a lot of the fast fashion is actually produced out with the UK and imported in, and having better visibility about what it is that we're actually buying. And that communications piece is really important as well. I hope that by providing a set of criteria that are used in identifying priority systems and sectors allows a consistency of approach. And it is able to identify sectors that we really do need to prioritise and tackle. The amendment also addresses some of the issues that are highlighted by Mark Ruskell at stage 2 around environmental harm, and I appreciate the engagement I've had with both members on this group. Happy to support this amendment. However, I can't accept Amendment 98 from Maurice Golden, because I think, as Ben McPherson said, this takes the opposite approach and locks in certain sectors and materials. That doesn't mean to say that those sectors won't be prioritised, because I think that Ben McPherson's amendment actually strengthens the bill in terms of giving the criteria of how do we address the priority sectors. Mr Ruskell also raised the important issue of the resources required for the transition to a circular economy at stage 2, and I'm really grateful for him for doing that. Amendment 31 refers to transition minerals, and Amendment 33 provides a definition of transition minerals, and the same minerals often called critical minerals. At stage 2, Mr Ruskell asked whether it's appropriate to put such provision in the bill, or if there was another way for the Scottish Government to work with industry to ensure that the aspiration to deal with critical minerals is addressed and in a sustainable way that can be reflected elsewhere in policy. And he specifically mentioned the energy strategy, for instance, and I've reflected on that. We've spoken out with the formal proceedings around this. It's a very important issue. I've given a commitment to Mr Ruskell on appropriate wording for the energy strategy. It is a very important issue that I think has to be honestly expanded on in the energy strategy. I'm happy to continue to do that, as with other sectors and minerals. I still don't believe that it should be in the face of the bill, but for that reason I hope Mr Ruskell will not press a vote on this amendment and instead continue to work with me. I think it's been worthwhile getting this on the record though, and if Mr Ruskell is in agreement not to press and work with me on the wording around what we do to tackle this in the energy strategy, which we will be publishing after the general election. I'll now go on to some. A lot of these other amendments are bringing back and refining issues from stage 2. Monica Lennon and Bob Doris followed up on the concerns they expressed at stage 2, and for the record also expressed by Sarah Boyack and Maurice Golden about the environmental and international impact any actions taken in Scotland as a result of the circular economy strategy might have. Now, I was really pleased to work with members on this. We had a very lengthy discussion on it. We were able to agree wording on Monica Lennon's Amendment 72. Very happy to support that. in relation to due diligence and supply chains, and also Bob Doris's Amendment 73 regarding international impacts, an issue that speaks to our responsibilities in terms of climate justice. And that actually, whatever the sort of material impact is actually a moral responsibility. So I really appreciate members highlighting it. Monica Lennon also highlighted the importance of taking the equalities issue into account during stage 2, and I agree that with her, not just on this policy but on every policy, should have a gender lens. So I agree that and welcome the constructive conversations we had on the point to reach consensus, and I'm happy to support Amendment 74. Similarly, following discussions with stakeholders and with Mr Ruskell, who highlighted the importance of carbon emissions within circular economy policy, I'm going to support Mark Ruskell's Amendments 40, 41 and 42. And in discussions with stakeholders, the issues of education and skills was raised. Happy to support Mr Ruskell's Amendment 43. Maurice Golden previously raised the issue of managing waste locally, and this was something that I thought was really laudable. Although at the time in stage 2 I couldn't agree in the wording, I definitely agree with the intent. But there may always be logistical, economic or social reasons why it may not be within, for example, a specific local authority area. After we had a discussion on this, we both agreed that we didn't really mean a local authority area. The principle is one that I agree with about having waste managed as close to where it's produced as is possible in a domestic setting. So I'm really happy to support his Amendment 65. And at stage 2, Claire Adamson raised concerns about the safety of second-hand electrical goods and the dangers of battery fires. I was happy to engage in further conversations with her on the issue. Events at the weekend in Linwood have shown how important this consideration is. We've got cross-party agreement on the importance of this, and while recognising that many of the legislative levers in this area around health and safety and product safety are reserved, I'm very happy to support her Amendment 45 and give my reassurance that safety matters in the recycling of all materials, not just electrical items, but electrical items in particular, are actively being looked at. Together, these amendments, I think, will strengthen the circular economy strategy of the bill as a whole. Amendment 96 from Sarah Boyack does replicate a number of issues dealt with by the other amendments I've just spoken to or were addressed at stage 2. I do understand our intention, but I can't support the amendment as written. Similarly for Amendment 35 from Monica Lennon, I agree very much that reuse is preferable to single use. But I believe this is already captured in the strategy's adherence to the waste hierarchy, and similarly reuse is also affected is also referred to in other amendments. So I don't believe this amendment is necessary, despite the fact that I understand the intent. And Amendment 94 on the costs and benefits of our policy proposals will be developed as part of a suite of impact assessments or have to accompany the strategies. I don't consider this amendment is necessary. Amendment 97 from Monica Lennon expands the requirements around just transition. I do agree that just transition is central to the development of a circular economy. That's why I brought forward an amendment at stage 2 to ensure that in preparing the circular economy, ministers must have regard to those principles. But I think the level of detail that's referred to in Amendment 97 to include in the strategy would be unduly burdensome and is dealt with in other ways, so I can't support it, sadly. Specifically, our approach to just transition planning is guided by our Just Transition Planning Framework and National Just Transition Outcomes. As I outlined on stage 2, we're committed to just transition plans for high-emitting sectors, sites and regions, and have already referred to our energy strategy and just transition plan, which will be published after the general election, as I've said. We've also got sectoral plans on agriculture and land use, built environment and construction and transport, and work is already underway in a site plan for Grangemouth. With regard to Amendment 93, a large majority of Scotland's waste is managed within Scotland, but Sarah Boyack is right to point out it's not all managed in Scotland. Around 15% is currently processed elsewhere. That's 15% too much, representing a lost economic opportunity as well as an environmental cost. However, international waste exports are a reserved policy area. I'll take a intervention.
Maurice Golden.
I wonder if the Minister could highlight to the Chamber how much plastic collected for recycling in Scotland is actually recycled here.
Minister.
Well, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I suspect that Mr Golden's got those numbers in front of him, or at least lodged in his brain. But I don't have that. I don't have that in front of me. But what I was going to say to Sarah Boyack is that international waste exports is a reserve policy, but that doesn't mean to say that we don't do anything about it. I can't support this amendment, and I would ask Parliament not to do so. But I want to reassure the Chamber that the Scottish Government are pressing the UK Government to deliver its existing commitment to ban plastic waste exports to non-OECD countries and bring forward further measures to influence global markets and reduce imported and exported emissions given constraints in devolution. Sarah Boyack's intentions are laudable, but they do require cross-government work across the UK governments in order to ensure that the UK Government, incoming UK Government, deliver those existing commitments. We'll continue to actively discuss waste shipment regulations. The UK Government must respond positively to the Committee of Climate Change calls for us to step up in that regard, and I hope that that means that we will be able to move forward 4 nations in the UK and delivering on the intention of Sarah Boyack's amendment here, but it's not something that I can support in this bill for the reasons I've outlined.
Thank you. And I now call on Mark Ruskell to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 31. Mr. Ruskell.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Look, I'm not going to try and summarise all of that. There are so many different issues there, but I just want to make a couple of points which are very relevant to this bill. I mean, I think the point that Ben Macpherson made in relation to 66 about, setting the right criteria within the bill, the right sort of framework within the bill to prioritise action in certain sectors is the right approach. There is a temptation, and I'm tempted often myself, to put everything on the face of the bill. And that doesn't always work. It's not always consistent with a bill that where decisions need to be made in time and often, through co-production with councils and business and stakeholders. So, I do think that the approach that Ben Macpherson has taken with 66 is the right way. To kind of set out the criteria. But of course what that emphasises is the importance of parliamentary scrutiny after the bill becomes an act and the choices that the government then make on the back of that. So, I very much welcome the commitment that the Minister's made to addressing the issue of critical minerals in the energy strategy rather than on the face of the bill. But obviously we'll wait and see what goes into the energy strategy, and no doubt that energy strategy will be robustly scrutinised by the NZEC committee. I'll give way to Mr Lumsden.
Douglas Lumsden. Thank Mr Ruskell for taking the intervention. I'm just going to ask, does he not feel that in terms of critical minerals that we should be looking at it not just for the energy sector, but all critical minerals, and maybe by moving it to there, it's actually not doing it justice?
Mark Ruskell.
Well, that's a reasonable point. I mean, I think the point I would make in relation to renewables is that you have a sector that is already really engaged in looking critically at how it, develops more ethical supply chains and how it is engaged in reuse and refurbishing of wind turbines. But it's a fair enough point, and I think, it kind of makes the point really that the ongoing strategies and work that government's engaged in really does need to look across the piece at critical sectors. And to be taking action in relation to that. Just a couple of other points. I mean, Sarah Boyack spoke at the outset about, that huge impact of offshoring our waste and that huge impact on the global south. And I think, Bob Doris also reflected on the excellent evidence that we had from SCIAF on that. And I think to answer Graham Simpson's question to Mr Doris, I mean, we do need to look at how we measure this stuff, but we've got sustainable development goals. They've been in place now for decades, and we should be building out really strong indicators to make sure that we are not punishing the global south for our profligacy in the north. And I think when it comes to choices here, I mean, Sarah Boyack's got Amendment 93 in this space around offshoring. I think on balance we prefer the approaches taken by Maurice Golden 65. I do recognise, though, the associated amendments that Monica Lenn has brought forward, number 72 on environmental and human rights due diligence in the supply chain. That's a really important kind of matching element to this. And I think it does need belt and braces in the bill, because we could look across and say, well, we're implementing the Human Rights Act, and these issues are embedded in legislation already. I think it is worth picking that out and making absolutely sure when it comes to supply chains that due diligence is being put in place. And I'm probably going to leave it there, but I just want to address one final issue, and that was in relation to so 44A. And I would say to Maurice Golden that I kind of agree with him that there is a strong set of criteria there for what you would want to prioritise for reuse and take-back schemes. But there may be exceptions to that. And I would point to plastic bags as being an area where actually the reuse and recycling of plastic bags probably doesn't make the biggest carbon impact that you could make from a reuse scheme or a take-back scheme, a deposit scheme. But nevertheless, it has been useful in terms of driving public debate and driving behaviour change. So I don't want to be too restrictive to government. I think government needs to make the decision about what they prioritise. In that case, 44, I think, stands on its own. Thank you.
Just to confirm, you want to press Amendment 31, Mr Ruskell?
I do not wish to press 31.
Okay, the member is seeking to withdraw Amendment 31. Does any member object? No member objects, and therefore Amendment 31 is withdrawn. I call Amendment 93 in the name of Sarah Boyack. Already debated with Amendment 31. Sarah Boyack, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 93 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. There will be a division, and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on amendment number 93 in the name of Sarah Boyack is yes 48, no 64. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call amendment 94 in the name of Monica Lennon, already debated with amendment 31. Monica Lennon, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 94 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on amendment number 94 in the name of Monica Lennon is yes 50, no 61. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 39 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with amendment 31. Maurice Golden, to move or not move?
Not moved.
It's not moved. I call amendment 40 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with amendment 31. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Question is that amendment 40 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 41 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with Amendment 31. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 41 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 95 in the name of Monica Lennon, already debated with Amendment 31. Monica Lennon, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 95 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Michael Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My app didn't connect. I would have voted yes.
Thank you. Point of order, Angela Constance.
It's slow and no connection. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Constance. I'll make sure that vote is recorded. Point of order, Brian Whittle. Point of order, Brian Whittle. Point of order, Brian Whittle.
Presiding Officer, my app was frozen. I would have abstained.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. I'll make sure that is recorded. And the result of the vote on amendment number 95 in the name of Monica Lennon is yes 29, no 57, abstentions 29. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call amendment 42 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with amendment 31. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 42 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 65 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with amendment 31. Maurice Golden, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 65 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 72 in the name of Monica Lennon, already debated with amendment 31. Monica Lennon, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 72 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 96 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with amendment 31. Sarah Boyack, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 96 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 96 in the name of Sarah Boyack is yes 48, no 67. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 97 in the name of Monica Lennon, already debated with Amendment 31. Monica Lennon, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 97 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on amendment number 97 in the name of Monica Lennon is yes 47, no 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is not agreed. I call amendment 43 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with amendment 31. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 43 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 98 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with amendment 31. Maurice Golden, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Amendment 98 is not moved. I call Amendment 44 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with Amendment 31. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 44 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Call Amendment 44A in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with Amendment 31. Maurice Golden, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 44A be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Keith Brown.
Apologies, I couldn't connect, Presiding Officer. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Brown. I'll make sure that is recorded. And the result of the vote on amendment number 44A in the name of Maurice Golden is yes 50, no 64. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call on Mark Ruskell to press or withdraw amendment 44.
Yeah, still moving. Yeah,
okay.
Press.
So the question is that amendment 44 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on amendment number 44 in the name of Mark Ruskell is yes 96, no 19. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. Call amendment 45 in the name of Claire Adamson. Already debated with amendment 31. Claire Adamson, to move or not move?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 45 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 73 in the name of Bob Doris. Already debated with amendment 31. Bob Doris, to move or not move?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Question is that amendment 73 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 74 in the name of Monica Lennon. Already debated with amendment 31. Monica Lennon, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 74 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Thank you. That is agreed. I call amendment 66 in the name of Ben Macpherson. Already debated with amendment 31. Ben Macpherson, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 66 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. I call amendment 33 in the name of Mark Ruskell. Already debated with amendment 31. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. I call amendment 75 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with amendment 31. Minister, to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 75 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Parliament is agreed. We will move on to Group 3, duties. Call amendment 76. In the name of the Minister, already debated with amendment 31. Minister, to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 76 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
Thank you. Just making sure you're paying attention. We move to Group 3, duties on public bodies and those in receipt of public funds. I call amendment 99 in the name of Maurice Golden, grouped with amendments 53 and 80. Maurice Golden, to move amendment 99 and speak to the other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to move Amendment 99. And these amendments enhance the requirements on public bodies to install due diligence measures. These are required because public procurement, in particular, is still not circular enough. The weakness of the Sustainable Procurement Act has been exposed in not delivering public procurement that can pump prime the circular economy, and these amendments will support that. In addition, particularly thinking about Amendment 53, if this work is adhered to already, then codification should not be an issue. In terms of Amendment 80 in this group, I'm sympathetic, but fear it may place too much of a burden on those in receipt of public funds. But I'm certainly happy to be convinced, and I hope that the current voting pattern, where the circular economy is defined by Indy Ref 2, is something that changes, and I'm hopeful of that, because actually the constitutional question is not, in my view, something that pertains to this bill. It's far more important than that. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Mark Ruskell to speak to Amendment 80 and the other amendments in the group. Mr Ruskell.
Yeah, thank you very much, Presiding Officer. So Amendment 80 brings back an issue that I raised at stage 2, requiring businesses and organisations in receipt of public funding to report on their contribution to the circular economy. And this does matter because the amount of money allocated by Scotland's 3 enterprise agencies is substantial. Total enterprise trade and support budget 23-24 was £423 million. So considerable investment, but also considerable power there to transform the economy. The proposal does not set rigid targets for companies in receipt of public money. It merely adds a requirement to assess how circular their existing practices are and to set out ways they intend to improve that, if possible, over the period covered by any grant or loan. So it is a light touch way of embedding thinking about circularity into the operations of businesses across the country, and takes a very similar approach to Maurice Golden's Amendment 99. So I hope that he would put constitutional divide to one side and back my Amendment 80. At stage 2, some members raised concerns about proportionality ensuring that this amendment doesn't place an undue burden on smaller organisations, and that potential recipients could then be put off from seeking public funding. Now, I have listened carefully to those concerns, and I've taken it into consideration in this revised amendment. So, rather than a standalone report on their contribution to the circular economy, organisations could include a statement on the extent to which their activities contribute to reducing, reusing, recycling materials in their annual report. The funding bodies can also exempt organisations from the reporting requirements on the basis of the sector that they operate in, the annual turnover of the company, or the total value of the grant or loan being offered. So this reduces the burden. A public agency can decide it will not add the requirements to small funding awards or to particularly small businesses. It would be up to them to do this. So this does give flexibility to funding bodies such as Hands and Eyes Enterprise, for example, to apply their judgment on a case-by-case basis. And I think this is an important mechanism. If we're serious about embedding circular economy practices across the economy, we need to recognise the power of the public pound, and we need to be creating this conditionality for grant making. And, indeed, this was referenced in the Scottish Government's 2016 strategy, Making Things Last, about the need for enterprise agencies to integrate circular economy thinking more seriously. It was mentioned, the Minister will remember, in her previous role as committee convener. It was mentioned in our Eclair Committee Green Recovery report in 2020 as we came out of COVID. Again, we were talking about embedding circular economy into grant-making processes. And it also keeps us in line with the EU's 2020 Economy Action Plan. And, of course, hugely important we stay aligned with the EU so that we can rejoin when Scotland is independent. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call briefly Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think one of the key issues here is thinking about the importance of procurement. And I'm very keen to support Amendment 53, because it raises awareness of circular economy issues right across the public sector. And I think in terms of implementation of the bill, that will be critical that this happens. I think it links very well with Monica Lennon's amendment, which she moved earlier, Amendment 72, which required the strategy to exercise due diligence in relation to environmental protection and human rights in the supply chain. So taking a joined-up approach, using the potential of the Scottish Government producing regulations to make this happen, I think would be very important. And I think the other issue is that giving a duty, as is set out in 99, to every public sector body, that actually makes it a day-to-day issue. It means that strategically public bodies think about their impact, they think about their supply chains, they think about their procurement, and they think about what difference it's going to make. And I think that's really critical in terms of the huge impact potentially we could have for the public sector in making the circular economy principles part of everyday public spending. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call the Minister.
Apologies, President Officer. I have quite a lot of notes in this because I think that it's actually important that I set out why we're not supporting any of the amendments in this group, despite the fact that I understand why they've been brought. So I want to give this a bit of time. If I turn to Amendment 99 from Maurice Golden, I do agree that public bodies have got a hugely significant role to play in delivering Scotland's circular economy, and the amendment highlights the role of procurement in particular, as just been outlined by Sarah Boyack as well. And I said at stage 2 that the Procurement Reform Act introduced a sustainable procurement duty. So it already requires public bodies to consider how they can improve the economic, social and environmental well-being and secure improvements. But also taking action through policy, public bodies should outline in their annual procurement strategy how they will use procurement to contribute to the response to the global climate emergency and report progress in their annual procurement reports. And this is required explicitly to address climate change and circular economy obligations. So that's already been done. Our latest annual report on procurement activity shows that in the 2021-22, 71% of reporting bodies provided evidence of how they were addressing environmental wellbeing and climate change through procurement. And in addition, public bodies are also required to comply with and report on wider climate change duties. And since 2015, over 180 public bodies have been required to report annually on their compliance with the climate change duties under the Climate Change Duties of Public Bodies Reporting Requirements Order 2015. And this includes, where applicable, targets for reducing indirect emissions and reporting on waste.
Douglas Lumsden.
I hear what the Minister is saying about public bodies having all these plans in place. So if that's the case, actually putting a circular economy plan on top of that shouldn't be an overburdensome thing for local authorities and other public bodies to do. So I'm struggling to see why the Minister would be so against public bodies having their own plan, that the Scottish Government are going to have a plan. I think public bodies need to have as well.
Yeah. Minister.
With respect, Mr Lumsden, it is burdensome. This amendment ties the definition of a public body to section 3, subsection 1A of the Freedom of Information Scotland Act, which could capture several thousand bodies, including all primary care providers delivering NHS services in Scotland, as well as other small to medium-sized organisations such as registered social landlords, independent special schools, all of whom would be required to comply. And that's my issue. It is overly burdensome to these smaller organisations. It would be disproportionate for many of these bodies and unworkable for all those plans to be approved by ministers. Now, I believe that continuing to develop and improve existing reporting requirements are the most appropriate ways of ensuring public bodies are delivered on circular economy, not creating potentially burdensome additional duties on public bodies at a time where public funds and resources are constrained. And I'll take Monica Lennon.
Monica Lennon.
I'm very grateful to the Minister. I'm not sure that I agree that this has to be a burden. Surely it's an opportunity. And if Scotland is going to aspire to become a more circular nation, surely we need to encourage all our public bodies, regardless of size, to play their part. And having a plan is really the start of that process.
Minister.
Encouraging is fine, but requiring a reporting and a plan for small organisations such as those that I've outlined, I think, is overly burdensome. As well as procurement obligations, I will look into incorporate further circular economy requirements within further revisions of climate change reporting guidance. And that comes back to the encouragement piece. There's already things in train. So I can't support Amendment 99, but I will keep this under review because, again, like so many of these amendments, I understand the intention. I just don't want them to have any unintended consequences. If I can move to Amendment 53, also from Maurice Golden. As I set out to the committee when we discussed this at stage 2, I agree wholeheartedly that preventing human rights harm and ensuring environmental due diligence are values that should be upheld. And our national performance framework has a very clear commitment to Scotland in which rights are respected, protected and fulfilled. A significant body of rights derived from the European Convention on Human Rights is already hardwired into the devolution settlement. In fact, it's already unlawful for Scottish public authorities to act in a way that's incompatible with those rights. And our national procurement legislation, the Procurement Reform Scotland Act, which I've already mentioned, includes a sustainable procurement duty, which requires contracting authorities to consider and act on opportunities to improve economic, social and environmental well-being, as I've mentioned. Contracting authorities with a procurement spend of £5 million or more in any financial year must set out and report on how they comply with the sustainable procurement duty. I think that's proportionate. The issue I have is disproportionate burdens on smaller organisations. And whilst we can exclude suppliers for breaches of environmental and human rights, we can't exclude companies from public procurement on the basis of universal adequate due diligence. So rather than introducing burdensome requirements that would discourage Scottish SMEs and third sector organisations, the very people that were keen win public contracts, we take a proportionate approach to addressing environmental and human rights risks in the supply chain. We also expect UK regulations to be made in due course in line with Schedule 17 of the UK Environment Act 2021, and these regulations will prevent the use of forest risk commodities derived from illegally deforested land in UK supply chain. And this will introduce an element of environmental due diligence. So, given the range of legislation already in place, our view is that this new duty on public bodies will be unnecessary. Excuse me, Presiding Officer. If Amendment 53 were to be passed, the additional burden would fall not just onto the public bodies themselves, but also to the businesses in the supply chains. And this would, through our commitment to the New Deal of Business, excuse me, just have to take a drink. Tonsillitis has reared its ugly head this week, and this week of all weeks. So I think that I understand that asking for a duty in public bodies is laudable. There's a cascade effect on small businesses that supply public bodies in order to get that information. Thank you. I do support the motivation behind this amendment. I supported the Amendment 72 and 77 from Monica Lennon, which I think references due diligence and actually deals with this issue in a more strategic and less burdensome way. If I can turn to Amendment 80 from Mark Ruskell. Yes, I will.
Allow the member a glass of water. I just wondered if the member agrees that all these amendments are making for very interesting debate.
Yeah, I thought the Deputy First Minister was going to offer to go out to the chemist and get me some lozenges there. But turning to Amendment 80 from Mark Ruskell, I recognise the importance of encouraging businesses to play their part. And I have written to the Chief Executives of the enterprise agencies to better understand what they're doing already in this space. And I'm actually challenging them on what more can be done. And they've given me, Highlands and Islands, I've already been back talking about bringing forward net zero conditionality from Q3 to support organisations to transition. I do understand the intention of the amendment is not to place extra burdens on businesses, but it does run the risk of that. So I think I want to take it under review. I want to scrutinise what the enterprise agencies are doing in this space, and if they're not encouraging in the same way that they do on net zero obligations and conditionalities, I think we have to have a stronger conversation in that respect. And I'll take an intervention from Mark Ruskell.
Thank the Minister for giving way. I mean, those are warm words, but I guess what I'm looking for is I'll just give the Minister a moment just to get a lozenge. I'm on the lozenges as well. But I'm just wondering, when do we go beyond the sort of warm words and letters being written to actual plans from the enterprise agencies? Because there's a lot of talk in this debate about burdens. Ultimately, this is about businesses and organisations becoming much more resource efficient, much leaner, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing for productivity. It's a good thing for business.
Cabinet Secretary.
I mean, I broadly agree with Mark Ruskell. I mean, I believe the focus should be on targeted action rather than broad reporting requirements and supporting businesses in order to make changes in their everyday. I don't agree that an legislative requirement focused on reporting is appropriate. I can't support it, but the general intent of Mark Ruskell's amendment around having businesses that receive public support be cognisant of their duties with regards to reaching net zero and the circular economy are absolutely laudable. I just can't support this amendment. And thank you for the time for me to have a cough sweet.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I now call on Maurice Golden to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 99. Mr Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I think the fundamental point in this group is if Parliament and the Scottish Government believes in a climate emergency, then we need to change things. Existing reporting requirements are not working, and insurances do not cut it. Where are the circular economy business models being procured? Very little. This government has been in power since 2007. And yet it's framing these obligations as burdens. In fact, there are opportunities to make savings and, yes, changes, perhaps requirements from moving from capital to revenue budgets. But nonetheless, there is a big problem here. And I'll just give one example, given the time constraints. The NHS has purchased 129.7 million disposable cups in Scotland since 2019, yet a little over 200,000 reusable cups. Now, that isn't an example of a circular economy business model, but is a very basic example of public bodies not applying the waste hierarchy, and therefore we require things to change. Happy to.
Cabinet Secretary.
I really just want to thank them for raising that, because I think that's why it's important that we have a debate around these issues. You're pointing to areas in which public bodies can do an awful lot more. I think this is an opportunity for those public bodies to reflect on some of the evidence that you've just given here and see how they can actually do better in this regard. So I just wanted to applaud that.
Maurice Gordon.
Thanks. I appreciate those comments. And I think my frustration here is that this is a climate emergency, and unfortunately there's no time for reflection. We need action now, and there's been plenty of time to do slow progressional change in this area, and it's not happening, and we're sitting here in 2024 and facing a daunting task in terms of what is required, not just from public bodies but from individuals, the third sector and the private sector. And on that note, I'd like to press Amendment 99.
Thank you, Mr Golden. The question is that Amendment 99 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division, and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 99 in the name of Maurice Golden is yes 52, no 60. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We now turn to Group 4, deadline for an expiry of regulation making powers under the bill. I call amendment number 1 in the name of Graham Simpson, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. And I call on Graham Simpson to move amendment 1 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Simpson.
Thank you, and I move amendment 1. Presiding officer, I've got 27 amendments in this group, all of which relate to deadlines for expiry of regulation making powers under the bill. I don't intend to give chapter and verse on them individually, and given the Minister's current state of health, I'd invite her to follow that approach. Now, at stage 2, I place similar amendments, offering the committee an opportunity to reduce timescales to either 6 months, 1 year or 2 years. These, I thought, were reasonable amendments. None of them required a particularly quick turnaround, because if we're serious about delivering a circular economy, I think we need an ambitious pace of working. So these amendments, like my previous ones at stage 2, set a timetable for various regulations under the bill and give the government of the day a deadline. Now, at stage 2, I invited the committee to, my phrase, turbo boost the bill under what I described in hope as the dynamism of Gillian Martin, but they and she rejected my invitation. In fact, the Minister told me she was not about the fast lane and cautioned me that we rush things at our peril. She didn't want to be tied to a timeline that requires the government to deliver regulations within 2 years, but she did recognise, her words, the need to make swift progress and the importance of timelines. So I was disappointed about what I saw as a lack of ambition. We want the government of the day, whoever that is, to deliver a circular economy properly, but also at pace. And I think that giving the government now 3 years is actually far too long. But in light of how things progressed at stage 2, that's what I'm opting for now. 3 years gives any government more than ample time to make regulations, including the meaningful consultation that the Minister referenced at stage 2. Now, in this group, I've also got a series of sunset clauses which say that if the government has not made regulations under these sections within 3 years, then they'll expire. That should focus the minds of any minister, I would have thought. And just to close, I'm grateful to have the support of Friends of the Earth for Amendments 1 and 2 in this group. Amendment 1 says that ministers must make regulations setting targets within 3 years. Friends of the Earth agree that regulations should be introduced as soon as possible. Amendment 2 says that if ministers don't hit that target, they should make a statement to Parliament explaining themselves. Now, I'm about to sit down now, you'll be pleased to hear, but I'll decide how I proceed with these amendments after hearing the views of other members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Simpson. And in fact, no other member has pressed, so I now call the Minister.
Not that it's much of a choice. I'm going to have to keep my comments brief because obviously to save my voice, but I'm effectively in danger of rehearsing some of the arguments I made at stage 2, and I won't go over them again because they're on the record. Many of the amendments relate to regulation powers that are subject to the affirmative procedure, such as for circular economy targets and for household recycling targets, and others such as regulations to impose charges for single-use items, and even subject to a super-affirmative procedure. So these regulations depend on the parliamentary approval and scheduling of parliamentary business. So I think these amendments are not risk at not being workable. I also don't want to constrain the important work there is to undertake sufficient time to come first to ensure we're taking an informed approach. I will leave it there, Presiding Officer. I have had conversations with Mr Simpson. He knows my position. I'm unable to support any of these amendments.
And I call Graham Simpson to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 1.
Thank you. I've not really anything to add to that, but I'll press Amendment 1 and we'll see how that goes.
Okay, thank you. The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Claire Adamson.
My app wouldn't connect, so I voted no.
Thank you, Ms Adamson. Your vote will be recorded. Point of order, Michael Mara.
Apologies, Presiding Officer. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Mara. Your vote will be recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 1 in the name of Graeme Simpson is yes 29, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We now turn to Group 5, Circular Economy Targets. I call Amendment 46 in the name of Mark Ruskell. Group with amendments as shown in the groupings. And I call on Mark Ruskell to move Amendment 46 and speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Ruskell.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. So earlier during Group 2, we discussed the desirability of an economy in which both the consumption of material goods and products we use are reduced together with their carbon life cycle emissions. So amendments 46, 47 and 48 mirror my earlier amendments 40, 41, 42, inserting similar provisions into Section 6 relating to targets, and I ask that members support these amendments. If I can just turn briefly to other amendments in the group. We support Maurice Golden's 67, which is in line with his earlier amendment on managing waste within Scotland as discussed in Group 2. And we also support 77 from Monica Lennon. As I said previously, it's right to take human rights and environmental due diligence into account when setting circular economy targets. And related to that also Sarah Boyack's 100, which takes into account the carbon emissions associated with the consumption of materials. And with that, I'll move Amendment 46 in my name, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. I now call Maurice Golden to speak to Amendment 67 and other amendments in the group. Mr Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Amendment 67 mirrors my earlier Amendment 65, ensuring the importance of managing waste in Scotland, if it is appropriate to do so, is taken into account as a desirable characteristic of a circular economy, which Scottish ministers must have regard to in relation to setting circular economy targets. This provides consistency between sections 1.3 and 6.2, and for the same reasons outlined previously, I urge members to support this amendment. Amendment 49 in this group is a weakened version of Stage 2 amendments around setting overall circular economy targets. Now, the Circularity Gap report estimates circular economy policies could see our emissions drop by 43% and resource consumption almost half. The UK economy is 7.2% circular, which is above the global average. However, Scotland is trailing far behind with a circular economy score of just 1.3%. In other words, 98.7% of the resources we use are from virgin sources. I'd like to change that, but while this amendment doesn't specify a target, as it did at Stage 2, it does allow for one to be set by regulation, however weak or lacking in ambition that may be. That is the decision of Scottish Government ministers. The only thing else I'd like to say is that all amendments in this group are positive ones, and I look forward to hearing more about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Golden. I now call Monica Lennon to speak to Amendment 77 and other amendments in the group. Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think there's a lot of agreement in terms of this group. We certainly support all of the amendments. I have one, which is Amendment 77, and that seeks to mirror my earlier Amendment 72, already debated and passed at Group 2. And that's about ensuring that the application of due diligence in relation to environmental protection and human rights is exercised in supply chains. And this will ensure that these issues are taken into account when ministers are producing secondary legislation. This provides consistency between sections 1.3 and 6.2, and for the same reasons that I set out earlier in the debate. I thank members for their comments, and I also ask them to support Sarah Boyack's Amendment 100. And as I said, we support all the amendments in this group.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. I call Sarah Boyack to speak to Amendment 100 and other amendments in the group. Ms Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendment 100 in my name would ensure that targets introduced via the regulations include cutting the carbon emissions associated with consumption. That's absolutely critical if we're going to bring down our CO2 emissions and meet our global aspirations and our commitments in Scotland. There was a lot of debate at stage 2 on what the targets will look like. While we have received some understanding from the Minister, I do have concerns that we still don't have a full grasp of what the targets will look like and what level they'll be at. And we really need to move to a circular economy to ensure Scotland is responsible and cutting our carbon emissions to net zero. And that's why Amendment 100 is essential to ensure that circular economy targets include cutting carbon emissions is at the heart of the targets produced and set as a result of the bill. I think one of the things that's really striking from amendments right across this section is the extent to which members have reflected on the discussion at stage 2. They've made sure that their amendments listen to what other colleagues said across the table when we were having the discussions. So the amendments by Mark Ruskell are really important about consumption, about goods, products, materials and linking that to carbon emissions. The amendment by Maurice Golden about the overall targets key, as is making sure that waste is managed in Scotland if it's appropriate to do so. It's to try and encourage that. It's not a you absolutely must, but it's getting people to think about it and raising it up the agenda. That's critical. I think the comments that Monica Lennon has made about human rights and supply chains again fits into that. And I think the comments by Ben McPherson in his amendment are also really important. We need to be thinking about how we are going to develop a circular economy so that we actually see the different sectors playing a key role in that. So I think all of the amendments in this group are really important. I have to say we also support the Minister's amendments in this group. And I think there's something about if we could have all these amendments approved, really would strengthen this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Boyer. I call Ben McPherson to speak to Amendment 68 and other amendments in the group. Mr McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move Amendment 68. Presiding Officer, at stage 2, we agreed an amendment that I lodged at that point, which added prioritising key sectors and systems identified in the development of the circular economy strategy into a list of examples of provision which may be made in regulations for circular economy targets. My Amendment 66, which we discussed earlier this afternoon in Group 2, and I'm grateful to Parliament for their support of that amendment. That Amendment 66 sets out criteria for identifying those priority sectors for the strategy, as colleagues will recall. Amendment 68 before us now, therefore, is a consequential amendment, making it clear that the same criteria apply to identifying those sectors and systems in the targets regulations as apply to identifying them for the purpose of the circular economy strategy. So, for clarity and completeness, I ask members to support Amendment 68.
Thank you, Mr McPherson. And I now call the Minister to speak to Amendment 78 and other amendments in the group. Minister.
Thank you. I just first of all want to say that I agree very much with Sarah Boyett's comments about reflecting on the debate we had around this in stage 2. And I think that the revised amendments that have come back, for the most part, largely for the most part, have reflected that people have listened to what each other had to say at that point in the debate and come back with workable amendments. And I think this is a really important group. Can I start with Amendments 46, 47 and 48 from Mark Ruskell? And Amendment 67 from Maurice Golden and Amendment 77 from Monica Lennon. These mirror amendments which were discussed in relation to Section 1, and for the same reasons outlined then, I am happy to support these amendments. Similarly, 78 and 79 in my name expand consultation requirements for targets in line with those discussed earlier in relation to Section 2 in the Circular Economy Strategy. I'd urge members to support my amendments. Amendment 100 from Sarah Boyack. I appreciate this area. There's a strong interest in this area from stakeholders who wish to see the importance of carbon emissions recognised, and I absolutely agree with that sentiment. Section 6, subsection 3 is a non-exhaustive list of possible targets, and so whilst recognising that the detail of these targets will be subject to further analysis and consultation, I am happy to support this amendment. And unfortunately, breaking the trend is Amendment 49. Again, I understand why Ms Golden has put it forward. During stage 2, I noticed in the stage 1 report, the committee said it understands the need for a robust approach to setting targets and supports rigour. And I do agree with that assessment, as any targets will have significant implications and require further detailed consultation. There are no official statistics to measure overall circularity, and while the Circularity Gap report provides an estimated figure, it is based on different data sets than other measures, such as the material flow account produced by Zero Waste Scotland. The Circularity Gap report also highlights that significant elements such as extraction rates are driven by areas outside of Scotland's control, such as fossil fuel extraction. And that's why I've set out an approach to setting targets based on the development of a monitoring and indicator framework to ensure consistency and certainty of data on which targets can be based. And unfortunately, Amendment 49 preempts that process, so I can't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I call on Mark Ruskell to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 46. Mr Ruskell.
I have no more comments to add, Presiding Officer, so I'll be pressing 46.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. The question is that Amendment 46 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 47 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with Amendment 46. Mark Ruskell to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 47 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I call Amendment 48 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with Amendment 46. Mark Ruskell to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 48 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I call Amendment 67 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with Amendment 46. Maurice Golden to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 67 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I call Amendment 77 in the name of Monica Lennon, already debated with Amendment 46. Monica Lennon to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 77 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I call Amendment 49 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with Amendment 46. Maurice Golden to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 49 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Shona Robertson.
Hi, thank you, Presiding Officer. I had difficulty reconnecting to my system. I would have voted no.
Thank you. Your vote will be recorded, Ms Robertson. The result of the vote on amendment number 49 in the name of Maurice Golden is yes 47, no 67. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 100 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with amendment 46. Sarah Boyack to move or not move? Moved. Thank you. The question is that amendment 100 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I call Amendment 68 in the name of Ben Macpherson, already debated with Amendment 46. Ben Macpherson to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 68 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I call Amendment 78 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 46. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 78 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I call Amendment 79 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 46. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 79 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I call Amendment 2 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 1. Graham Simpson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 3 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with Amendment 1. Graham Simpson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. Thank you. So we now turn to Group 6 on recycling targets. I call Amendment 50 in the name of Maurice Golden, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings, and I call on Maurice Golden to move Amendment 50 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to move Amendment 50, and certainly a number of the amendments in this group are really easy for the Scottish Government to support, because many of them simply codify the Scottish Government's own targets but give them years extra, sometimes more than a decade, to achieve it. And I'm certainly convinced that with the extra time, years extra time to deliver it, that almost anyone in this chamber would be able to do so. But we'll see if the Scottish Government are up to that very, very low bar. Amendment 50 is on the overall recycling target. The Scottish Government said they could do it to 70% by 2025. This brings that to 2026, and actually progress is very good and strong, and I'm confident that Scotland will achieve that in any case. So a very easy one as a starter for 10. The recycling targets 2030 is in line with the UK Climate Change Committee recommendations for more stretching targets in this area. This is definitively ambitious, and in that regard I would expect the Scottish Government will not support it. But I'm ambitious and I believe in the climate emergency, so that's why I've proposed it. Amendment 52 around the household recycling rate of at least 50%. Household recycling rates have flatlined for a decade and currently sit at 43%, but they're very, very easy to fix. And in fact, this amendment allows the Scottish Government 13 years extra time to achieve the target that they set. I haven't come up with this. The Scottish Government said they would do this by 2013. This amendment says 2026. So 13 years extra to do a very easy target should be something that Scottish Government are able to support. Otherwise, there are massive problems to address. Next up, 2028. Again, this time I haven't been quite so generous, Deputy Presiding Officer. I've asked the Scottish Government to deliver that particular recycling rate of 60% 8 years later. So it's only an extra 8 years to attain that very easy recycling rate. 70 is in relation to 70% by 2030, which I appreciate is one step further and minorly ambitious. And in that regard, if you lack ambition then in this chamber, then you might not want to support that. 62 is essentially annual reports on progress, because, as we've seen, we can't have failure after failure, year after year, without some form of reporting. And I think it's incredibly important, given the proven track record of failure from the current Scottish Government. I'm supportive of amendments in this group, and I would hope that all members who believe in tackling a climate emergency would support my amendments as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Golden. I now call Graham Simpson to speak to Amendment 10 and other amendments in the group. Mr Simpson.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of amendments in this group. That's 10 and 36. The bill will only increase recycling rates in Scotland if it introduces dedicated recycling targets for household waste recycling or core materials. I'll discuss that later. These targets should be aligned with those set out under the UK-wide Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme. Without these targets, waste management companies here have no incentive to properly sort and recycle all materials. Introducing targets means they would need to demonstrate proper treatment of all materials in order to receive EPR fees, and that would all drive improved recycling in Scotland. So Amendment 10 says there should be targets for each core material, including drinks cartons, while 36 is slightly less prescriptive, and I'm grateful to Monica Lennon for supporting that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Simpson. I call Monica Lennon to speak to Amendment 104 and other amendments in the group. Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think this grouping of amendments is important, and again it follows on from a really important debate that we had around stage 2. We believe that the targets proposed by Maurice Golden and Graeme Simpson in this grouping will be critical in driving up action to increase recycling. We also agree that targets are really essential, but as we've seen in relation to climate targets, what's really crucial is action. And given the framework nature of this bill, it is really critical that we set the right ambitions now so that we can steer the right action to meet those ambitions in future. In terms of my own amendments, I just have one in this group, Amendment 104, and that is to make further provision for the promotion of reuse to assist local authorities to achieve their targets. And this again is connected to Scottish Labour's concerns that initially the bill had a lot of focus on recycling, but not enough on other important parts of the waste hierarchy, in particular reuse. Section 13 of the bill deals with targets for household recycling specifically, but ultimately I think it is important that we include provisions for the promotion of reuse wherever possible. And I want to again thank Scottish Environment Link for their support for this amendment. The amendment recognises the crucial role of local authorities. Increasing reuse through these targets will help our local authorities to drive down the amount of waste ending up in landfill and help to ease the transition to a more circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. I now call the Minister to speak to Amendment 91 and other amendments in the group. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I just double check something? Right. I understand Maurice Golden's intentions with amendments 50, 69, 52 and 51 and 70, and I can't support them. However, I said in stage 2, and I've also said in response to recent parliamentary questions, that we intend to actively consider targets for separate waste streams and carbon-based metrics, which we believe will accelerate the reduction of household waste more effectively than the previous targets. And this approach is based on the Committee for Climate Change's recommendations. These amendments would preempt that detailed consideration and consultation that will be required before any future national statutory targets are set. I'll just finish my point. I also want to reiterate again that sections 6 and 7 of the bill already enable Scottish ministers to set targets by regulations, and such regulations may provide for targets in relation to increasing recycling, as well as reducing waste and increasing reuse. And whilst the powers in the bill do not require Scottish ministers to specifically set national targets for recycling, the aims of these amendments could be achieved by those existing provisions once appropriate targets are developed and agreed in the co-design process.
Maurice Golden.
I appreciate what the Minister is saying. Really 2 points on that. If the intention is to go down a material and carbon metric route, why did the Scottish Government abandon that in 2012? And secondly, Mary McCallan, in a written question to me, said that these recycling targets, the Scottish Government's own recycling targets, are still valid and they're still attempting to achieve them. So why wouldn't the Scottish Government accept codification of their own targets?
Minister.
So, as Mr Golden rightly points out, 2012 was when the original targets were set. We have now received advice from the Committee for Climate Change that carbon metrics and identifying the waste streams is the best way forward. That's why we're taking this view now. So 2012 is a long time ago now, and obviously there's up-to-date advice which we're adhering to. We've also set out our intention to co-design appropriate recycling targets for individual local authorities using powers in Section 13 of the Bill to help drive continued improvements in local recycling. Development of such local targets can inform an impact on future national household recycling rates. And I would like to reassure the Chamber that development of appropriate statutory circular economy targets, including consideration of the potential for future recycling targets, will be a key priority for the Scottish Government as part of the implementation of this Bill's measures and the circular economy strategy. And it's for similar reasons that I can't support Amendments 10 and 36 in the name of Graham Simpson. The wording of the amendments presents some legal issues as it appears to attempt to provide new definitions of dry, recyclable waste streams, and in doing so undermines definitions that are already set out in the Environmental Protection Act. These existing definitions inform local authority and commercial waste collection, the transport of waste, its sorting and reprocessing, and associated obligations such as the duty of care, permitting and licensing obligations and producer responsibilities. So existing definitions will also inform packaging EPR when it comes in from 2025. Both amendments 36 also imply that a target must be set for each core material in the Code of Practice. Now, I understand why Graham Simpson has brought this forward. We've had a discussion about this, and Graham Simpson and I have had a discussion around it's a market signal. So a market signal when you identify and prioritise particular waste streams. And I understand that desire to signal priority waste streams for that market view, and it may encourage certain businesses to set up in relation to those waste streams. But that's what the co-design process is going to do. I am feeling very confident the co-design process will give those signals without any of these targets being on the bill. Turning to Amendment 62, Sections 5, 6 and 7 of the bill already provide for reporting on progress on the circular economy strategy, and the monitoring and reporting of the circular economy targets and any recycling targets is set out as part of those targets by ministers. And work is underway to establish an agreed monitoring and indicating framework, as I've mentioned, that can be used to track different aspects of the circular economy and form the basis of future targets. This will inform stakeholder input and engagement over the coming year. And the aims of these amendments could be achieved by existing provisions, and therefore I'm unable to support Amendment 62. I very much welcome the intentions around Monica Lynn's Amendment 104, and I understand why she's brought it. It is important to encourage the reuse of items that divert materials away from waste streams. However, we've looked at this in the deliberation and assessment of the amendments that have come forward at stage 3, and this amendment allows for provision in regulations regarding recycling targets for local authorities that's out with the scope of their existing statutory responsibilities as waste authorities. Local authorities recycle waste, but reuse prevents things from becoming waste. So reuse cannot be a statutory waste function of local authorities, and that's the difficulty with this amendment as it's been put forward. For the amendment to work, it would need new statutory functions relating to reuse being imposed on local authorities, and adding this to the recycling target provision would not achieve the aims of the amendment. As I said at stage 2, local authorities' statutory waste collection and waste management obligations don't include reuse, so the regulation making power in section 13 relates solely to the setting of recycling targets. And I'll take Ms Lennon.
Monica Lennon.
I'm grateful to the Minister, and hopefully there'll be a break soon so that the Minister's voice can get a little bit of respite. I think I understand the point the Minister is making in terms of the statutory duties, but I suppose people in the Chamber and out with the Chamber will be wondering how this bill is therefore going to encourage more activity within the local authority space to work with our third sector partners and others so that we can see that shift towards more reuse, because it is really important. And if we can't support such a simple amendment as this one, how else can we give effect to that?
Minister.
Yeah, I think already there have been a number of amendments which have embedded reuse into the bill now as it's becoming as amended at stage 3. I'd say that local authorities' recycling obligations include preparation for reuse. And I think that's the avenue that we take, preparation for reuse. In other words, activities with products and parts of products that have become waste are made suitable for reuse. And they also have obligations to manage waste with regard to the waste hierarchy, but of course reuse being further up the waste hierarchy than recycle. And so the bill already makes provision for the code to address preparation for reuse, but as a result of some of the earlier amendments passing, we're embedding reuse into I suppose, the prompts that we have for the co-design process. We don't think it would be appropriate to prescribe mandatory requirements in relation to the provision of wider reuse and repair services, simply because it doesn't fall under the statutory duties of local authorities. And I think there's a difficulty in there from a legal point of view. So with regret, I can't support the amendment. But if it helps, I support what Ms Lennon's trying to achieve with the amendment. It's just a little bit difficult in legal terms. Finally, I've lodged Amendment 91 in order to correct a minor error in Section 13. It doesn't change the purpose or intent of the bill, though, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. I call Mark Roscoe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. So in this group, we won't be supporting Maurice Golden's amendments, with the exception of Amendment 62. And we have discussed at stage 2 at length the drawbacks of setting fixed targets in this bill. So setting a recycling target for 2026 does give very little time for co-design with local authorities to take place, very little time for them to actually prepare a very detailed plan to meet their targets. And I think we recognise that some local authorities are further ahead on this than others. Some local authorities may be able to meet a target of 26, others won't be. We need to ensure that everybody gets the support they need to move together. However, I am convinced about Amendment 62, which requires the Scottish Government to report annually on Council's progress to meeting their targets. It is helpful to have that additional information. I listened to what the Minister said, that there will be reporting on the strategy alongside that. But I think a report coming to Parliament, I think, would be very useful. It would bring that additional scrutiny. And I think that builds on the amendment that I put forward at stage 2, which requires ministers to come to Parliament if there's a missed target and to report on that. A similar provision to what we have within the climate bill. Yes, I'll take a...
I'm struggling to understand the argument here from Mark Ruskell, because how can they come back with a report on how they've, on where they are with targets if there is no targets? I'm confused.
Mark Ruskell?
Well, there will be targets, and the targets will be co-produced and developed with local authorities. I mean, I'm not just sticking any old target on the face of a bill and then just seeing if it works or not. This needs careful co-production. And I listened very, very carefully to the evidence that we had from COSLA, the evidence that we actually had from the previous minister at stage 1 as well. And I think that's why we've reached the position that we're at. But, take heart, Mr Lumsden, we will be backing Amendment 62. In terms of Monica Lennon's 104, I'm really tempted to back this. I really am, because I'm not seeing enough action on reuse. And on Friday last week, I met with a lot of reuse charities in Stirling, circular communities as well. And there's some fantastic work happening, but it's not happening everywhere. And so I'm frustrated with this. I mean, I listened to what the Minister said, that reuse cannot be a statutory function. It doesn't fit with the statutory duties. But like Ms Lennon, I'm at a loss to see how we then take this forward in a way that's meaningful, because I don't want to just see good practice in 1 or 2 local authorities, but other local authorities not following that, and reuse and repair in particular not being an option for people when they go to their waste management site. So, yeah, I'll take Ms Lennon's guidance actually on what she now wants to do with 104.
Thank you. I think that's a really important contribution from Mark Ruskell. And maybe just for clarity, it's an opportunity to say that what Amendment 104 seeks to do is placed a duty on the Minister when creating secondary legislation under Section 13. So it's not about putting that onto local authorities directly. I think throughout the scrutiny of the bill, we have heard a real appetite out there to see more activity on reuse. And our local authorities certainly are looking for more guidance and more support on that. So when Mark Ruskell says he feels a bit frustrated, I think that's putting it politely. I have to say, in the gentlest possible way, I did think the Minister's explanation was a little bit on the weak side, because I really take the point about the importance of co-production and the spirit of the Verity House Agreement. But this is now not about imposing a duty directly onto local authorities. I think it is really important, as much as we can, as the Minister says, to embed reuse into the bill. But again, simply 104 says to make further provision for the promotion of reuse to assist local authorities to achieve their targets. Seeking to be really helpful here, I think there is cross-party support for the intention of the amendment, and hopefully the Government can give full consideration. But I'm grateful to Mark Ruskell for giving way. Mark Ruskell? Yeah, I mean that was a useful intervention, and I think those of us, who are frustrated at the lack of focus on reuse, do want to see this highlighted within the bill. I hope that 104 is an elegant enough amendment that it can sit within the bill and it can work and it can actually drive progress from local authorities, notwithstanding what the Minister has already said on this. I don't know if the Minister wants to reflect further on what she's heard from Monica Lennon.
Minister? I would just like to point to the difficulties and the statutory obligations around local authorities already, and I think that it's all very well for us to promote and prompt reuse to be part of their strategy. For me, I think that that's for the co-design process and for local authorities to be sharing good practice within that co-design process and prioritise reuse, as they should be, given the waste hierarchy. Putting it in the bill, I don't think is actually going to have much in the effect, and actually, given the statutory limitations that there are, I don't think it's going to be problematic, but I just don't think it's going to achieve what Ms Lennon wants it to achieve. I think the co-design process, and hopefully local authorities are hearing us loud and clear about the prioritisation that we want local authorities to have on reuse, and the co-design process is their opportunity to prove to us that they can carry this forward and do the things that we want to see happening.
Mark Ruskell.
Appreciate those thoughts, and I think at that point I'm going to close and then hand back to, I think, Mr Golden to wind up.
Thank you, and I call Maurice Golden to wind up and press and withdraw Amendment 50.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I must admit to be a little bit perplexed at the Scottish Government setting targets that now they have on record as wanting to vote against their own targets, despite them being more than a decade after they should have been met. So just to be clear, Deputy Presiding Officer, there is no surprise to local authorities. Local authorities would have been expecting to meet these recycling targets in 2013. So 2026 is not a rush. It's a very, very long time afterwards. And many local authorities do a fantastic job and are surpassing that. Now, the carbon metric, which around a decade ago the Scottish Government again promised to introduce, one of the main drawbacks of that from local authorities at the time is it would encourage textiles to be collected and probably not glass at curbside, and that would be a movement. Now, that has unintended consequences in terms of the third sector access to those, and that's why I believe the Scottish Government dropped it then. Nothing to do with any other advancement, but it appears as if, even though a decade ago it was the wrong move, suddenly it's the right move, and the other targets that were the right move then are now the wrong move. And the new strategy is exactly the same as the old strategy. For the last almost 20 years, there's been a co-design process between the Scottish Government and local authorities in terms of delivering recycling. That has delivered a very average recycling rate, mirroring that of England, to be honest, and is a complete contrast to that of Wales. And Wales did not use that co-design process that the Scottish Government have been deployed and have now dressed up, and now we're going to redeploy the same process and expect different results, even though year after year they fail to meet their own targets. But we are where we are. There's no climate emergency because, to put it bluntly, Deputy Presiding Officer, if we can't collect household waste at curbside effectively, there is no chance of achieving the transformational behaviour change that is required to meet net zero targets. We may as well forget all those debates about net zero. If we can't do the basics, pack your bags, get in a gas guzzler and drive home. Thank you.
Mr Golden, can I just clarify that you are indeed pressing Amendment 50? Thank you. The question is that Amendment 50 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 50 in the name of Maurice Golden is yes 48, no 65. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 69 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with amendment 50. Maurice Golden to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I now call amendment 52 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with amendment 50. Maurice Golden to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 52 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 52 in the name of Maurice Golden is yes 47, no 67. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 51 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with amendment 50. Maurice Golden, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 51 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Claire Adamson.
Sorry, my app wouldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Adamson. Your vote will be recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 51 in the name of Maurice Golden is yes 47, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 70 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with amendment 50. Maurice Golden, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call amendment 53 in the name of Maurice Golden, already debated with amendment 99. Maurice Golden, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call amendment 80 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with amendment 99. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 80 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 80 in the name of Mark Ruskell is yes 7, no 89. There were 19 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 4 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with amendment 1. Graham Simpson, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. We now turn to Group 7, restrictions on the disposal of unsold consumer goods. I call amendment 81 in the name of Sarah Boyack, grouped with amendments 82, 34, 35, 83 and 84. And I call on Sarah Boyack to move amendment 81 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Ms Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I move amendment 81 in my name. First of all, I do want to thank the Minister and her team for helping craft the amendments I've laid here, numbers 81, 83 and 84. As I said at stage 2, retailers in particular were concerned about this provision and felt that measures over unsold food waste, in addition to a number of regulations that will be placed on them over a short period of time, would prove challenging. So I hope that this amendment will provide reassurance to sectors sectors which had concerns on food waste being covered in this section. And Amendment 83 in my name would ensure that guidance on the implementation of this section is published by the Scottish Government, while Amendment 84 is a consequential and technical amendment. I do think that these amendments are clearly in line with the committee's report recommendations, and the guidance would be able to help make it clear to businesses the scope of unsold goods that would be affected, because we know that a number of businesses are already trying to repurpose unsold goods and or divert them away from landfill, but there are circumstances where a good is damaged or contaminated, where it would be unsafe to put it into another use. So guidance is needed to ensure that businesses and producers are able to do the right things in the letter of the law and ensuring the public's health and safety. So I do hope that members will feel able to support my amendments this afternoon. I also want to say that I support the Minister's Amendment 82. I think it does add clarity and is therefore helpful. And finally, I just want to comment on Graham Simpson's amendments number 34 and 35. 34 includes provision to prioritise reuse rather than recycling, which I think is really good because it's pushing it up the hierarchy. Whereas 35, I think, is really positive. It potentially has an impact on our communities. Because the social benefit that would be delivered by unsold goods could not be more important during a cost of living crisis. So it does feel unusual to support all the amendments in this group, but that certainly is what I'm going to do this afternoon. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. Can I call on the Minister to speak to Amendment 82 and other amendments in the group? Minister.
Presiding Officer, I welcome Amendments 34 and 35 from Graham Simpson. Indeed, the bill's consultation was launched at Fresh Start, and members may be aware of the wonderful work that they do in redistributing goods to help support those who have previously been homeless. We'll all have similar organisations in our constituencies and regions. In Aberdeen, we've got Instant Neighbour. In Peterhead, in my area, we've got Stella's Voice. And they're fantastic examples of what we want to see happen. And I absolutely agree that reuse should be prioritised over recycling. In fact, it's entirely in line with the waste hierarchy, and I am very happy to support Amendment 34. Amendment 35, I understand why Graham Simpson has put it forward, and I agree with the intentions behind this and the sentiment behind it. In particular, the great work of Circular Communities Scotland and its members in this space. However, there are some problems with it, which means I can't support it. Maximising social benefit is not something that can be defined in regulations, unfortunately. And I'm further concerned that the wording around existing networks of the community reuse organisations would, if this were to be put into the bill, would exclude any new organisations that may be formed or other good causes which could reuse products, and that's unfortunate. I'm sure that wasn't, and I know it wasn't, Mr Simpson's intention that it would be an unintended consequence of passing this amendment today. So whilst I can't support the amendments that's written, I'd be happy to commit to highlighting both the role and importance of the third sector in this area within the guidance associated with these provisions in order to avoid the unintended consequences of this particular amendment, whilst making progress towards the intent behind it. So I urge Mr Simpson not to press it, but take my reassurances at face value that I'm happy to committing to highlighting that role. Turning to Amendment 81. Concerns from retailer and hospitality sectors in relation to food were highlighted by Ms Boyack at Stage 2. My predecessor, Lorna Slater, had previously highlighted that the policy intention of this amendment was to target durable goods. In addition, similar provisions at EU level also contain an exclusion for food, so I'm happy to support Amendment 45. And similarly, the issue of guidance that was discussed at Stage 2, I agree with Ms Boyack, should be appropriate that guidance should be published to provide certainty to businesses and enforcement agencies. And I was happy to work with Ms Boyack on alternative wording that assured the guidance was published at an appropriate point. Happy to support our amendments 83 and 84. And at Stage 2, there seemed to be an expectation from members that the new power in Section 8 of the bill would prohibit or restrict the disposal of a whole range of goods rather than just some particular goods, such as textiles, which have been talked about in the first instance. So my Amendment 82 clarifies that regulations may specify the particular types of goods for which restrictions apply. And I hope this provides extra clarity to businesses, and I'd ask Parliament to support it. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And I call Graeme Simpson to speak to Amendment 34 and other amendments in the group. Mr Simpson.
Thank you very much indeed. So I've got amendments 34 and 35. I'm really grateful to Circular Communities Scotland for suggesting these amendments, and I'm grateful to Monica Lennon and Sarah Boyack for supporting them, and also to the Minister for supporting Amendment 34, and I'll speak about that one first. So Section 8 of the bill, looking at restrictions on the disposal of unsold goods, is a really important section. It's got wide support. It speaks to minimising waste, which we all want to see, but it should go further and explicitly state that unsold goods and returns should be prioritised for reuse over recycling as per the waste hierarchy. Now, Amendment 34 seeks to ensure that Section 8 of the bill is explicit in highlighting the value of reuse over just taking something back and breaking it down for recycling. For example, small electrical goods or textiles or furniture returns or bikes even that are in good working order deserve to be put back into the economy and kept in safe use for as long as possible. So this amendment, that's Amendment 34, I think is in line with the principles of creating the conditions for a strong circular economy. And again, I'm really grateful to have the Minister's support on that. If I can turn to Amendment 35, backed by Monica Lennon, I see that as complementary to 34. It speaks to the principles of passing unsold goods back into the economy via the existing network of community-based and charitable organisations that exist across the country. And most members will be aware of their local reuse projects and charity shops. Not only do they take in donations of goods and reduce waste, they maximise the social value of those donations through their wider charitable activities that can then undertake from the income of selling donated goods. I'm just going to go, I'm going to skip to the comments made by... was there an intervention?
Yes.
Yes, certainly.
Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. I just wondered if Graeme Simpson could address the point that the Minister made, which is that his amendment refers to existing networks of community reuse organisations in Scotland, and it was the Minister's view that that then wouldn't apply to new networks. Is that something that he's considered in drafting this?
Graeme Simpson.
Well, handily, I was just about to come on to that. I'd skipped a whole load of speaking notes just to address those very points, because the Minister, well, first she questioned, what is meant by social benefit? How do you define that in law? And I accept her point. We've discussed this. And I don't want to see something in legislation that has no real meaning. I also hear what she says about the phrase existing network. And on reflection, I think the word existing is superfluous and perhaps damages the amendment. And I take her point that, we could, I think it wouldn't work with that word in. So I'll not be pressing that amendment, sadly. It hasn't been written my fault in the way I would have liked, but I will press Amendment 34. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Simpson. I call Sarah Boyack to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 81. Ms Boyack.
Thank you very much. Well, I certainly want to press Amendment 81, especially given that it's got some good support. I think that the last exchange about how we support our local communities, how we support the third sector, that are already doing a fantastic job and enable them to scale up. I think that has to be one of the things we take away from this piece of legislation, that is unfinished business. I think getting the detail right is always important when it comes to legislation, so I note Graeme Simpson's comments. He's not going to push his amendment, number 35, but I do hope that all the other amendments in the group can get passed, because I think if we could really push push for this to happen, it is going to make a big difference to our constituents. It's also going to mean that products that would otherwise have been wasted are going to be put back into use, and that is something we have to support. And I think making sure that we maximise the use of all those goods is not just good for the environment or the planet, it's good for our constituents, and that at the moment I think has to be at the heart of our agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. The question is that Amendment 81 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 82 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 81. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 82 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are all agreed. I call Amendment 34 in the name of Graeme Simpson, already debated with Amendment 81. Graeme Simpson to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 34 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I call Amendment 35 in the name of Graeme Simpson, already debated with Amendment 81. Graeme Simpson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 83 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 81. Sarah Boyack to move or not move? Thank you. The question is that Amendment 83 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are all agreed. I call Amendment 5 in the name of Graeme Simpson, already debated with Amendment 1. Graeme Simpson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 84 in the name of Sarah Boyack, already debated with Amendment 81. Sarah Boyack to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 84 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are all agreed. I call Amendment 6 in the name of Graeme Simpson, already debated with Amendment 1. Graeme Simpson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 7 in the name of Graeme Simpson, already debated with Amendment 1. Graeme Simpson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. And that brings us to Group 8, single-use items and vaping products. I call Amendment 101 in the name of Sarah Boyack, grouped with Amendment 71, and I call on Sarah Boyack to move Amendment 101 and to speak to both amendments in the group. Ms Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. At Stage 2, I supported amendments to exempt biodegradable coffee cups from future regulations. And I made the point that a small number of coffee shops in my region in the Lothians have switched to using biodegradable coffee cups, using the innovation of producers which are based in Edinburgh. I do accept the Government's concerns on the use of the word biodegradable in legislation, but looking further at the production methods of biodegradable cups, there are two acids, polylactic and crystallised polylactic, that are sometimes the core components. Now, polylactic acid is a biodegradable thermoplastic obtained from renewable and organic sources. So I don't believe that we should hinder particularly small coffee shops who are making sustainable choices and already helping to create the circular economy we want to see as a result of this bill. So if the Government can't accept this amendment, I'm making a presumption here, I would be very keen to get confirmation from the Minister as to whether she will look at biodegradable cups fully prior to regulations, placing a charge on single-use coffee cups and exempt them within the regulations. The second amendment in this group I would strongly support in the name of Gillian Mackay. Vapes are becoming... Is that a point of intervention?
Yeah, thank the member for giving way. I mean, is she not concerned, though, that by creating an exemption for compostable cups, it just creates an enormous loophole in any kind of deposit scheme or take-back scheme that's introduced? And actually, a lot of these coffee cups require quite specialist composting for them to have a high environmental performance. That just might not be available to the smaller coffee shops or householders or whatever that might find themselves just inundated with compostable cups and not knowing anything what to do with them.
Sarah Boyack.
Well, I think using compostable products and disposing of them effectively is absolutely critical to the waste hierarchy and to dealing with our waste. I know I'm now interested when I go into a shop to see if a bag is compostable or not. And actually, some mainstream shops are now using bags. So there's something about making sure that things are reusable, compostable, and they're not just thrown out and wasted. So I think that's what's beneath the ambition in my amendment. So I don't think it's about creating loopholes. I think it's about reusing and making the best of products. The last point I wanted to make was on Gillian Mackay's amendment. I do very much support the fact that vapes are increasingly becoming complex products, which are more difficult to ensure that all of those component parts are recycled and reused. So I think the amendment that Gillian Mackay is moving this afternoon is very helpful, and we should support this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Gillian Mackay to speak to Amendment 71 and the other amendment in the group.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I want to acknowledge the work to date the Scottish Government has done to highlight the health and environmental harms of single-use vapes and the commitment to work on a four-nations basis on a ban. I'm bringing this amendment to place a ban on single-use vapes within this bill, and I'm responding to concerns that the ban that's previously been agreed may be delayed due to the current election going on. Not due to a change necessarily in policy or sentiment, but simply because it takes time to bring forward legislation of real concern about the timescales to take that four nations approach and bring forward a ban. Presiding Officer, the very real harms that single-use vapes are causing every day mean that we cannot risk waiting. Indeed, a report for Zero Waste Scotland estimated that the total emissions that were associated with single-use vapes in 2022 were between 3,375 and 4,292 tonnes of CO2. This is the equivalent of the emissions of 2,100 cars on the road. It also showed that the weight of packaging and materials that are discarded as a result of single-use e-cigarette consumption in Scotland is between 800 and 1,000 tonnes a year. Other figures show that 1.3 million single-use vapes were thrown away every week in the United Kingdom last year, although that figure is likely to be far higher now. It's an impending environmental catastrophe. In the middle of a climate crisis, the last thing that we need is another polluting single-use product, and a ban on disposables is the minimum that we need in order to protect the planet. My amendment would see powers to implement a ban on single-use vapes placed in Scots law. It would also enable ministers to put in place an interim scheme requiring retailers to take back single-use vapes. And I'll take the intervention from Mr Simpson.
Graham Simpson.
Thank Gillian Mackay for taking the intervention. I support the amendment. I just want to know how Gillian Mackay sees it working in practice. Does she think that there should be a take-back scheme applying to every retailer who sells single-use vapes? Should they be compelled to take them back? And does she think that if you take back a single-use vape, you would then be given some money for doing so?
Gillian Mackay.
I think there are different ways that you could operate a take-back scheme, either with some form of deposit on the product. I think if retailers are happy to sell these products, they should also be happy to take them back and recycle them in the appropriate manner. Yep.
Edward Mountain.
The member very much for taking the intervention. Most of these single-use vapes lie around our streets after they've been discarded. What concerns me about this amendment, there's no way to stop that happening, or it's encouraging people to hand them back. So, I mean, whereas a ban may help in the long term, I don't think this is going to help in the short term. Can you convince me that this amendment will make people hand them in rather than throw them under the nearest bush they pass?
Gillian Mackay.
Taking the example of the local authority where I live in Falkirk, you have to take your single-use vapes. The easiest place to take them back is back to the local waste centres or tips around the area. A lot of the time you need a car to be able to get there, so that initially puts people off going. If you're taking them back to the shop that you're then going to buy your next vape from, that's much, much easier than it is under the current system. And Mr Mountain is smiling. I hope I may have at least convinced him in the general direction. There are such voluntary schemes already underway in some retail outlets, but this amendment would allow that to be strengthened and expanded across more retailers. I appreciate the difficulties this amendment gives government in terms of Internal Market Act issues, but I think it's important that we take every opportunity possible to raise this issue. It's both an environmental and health issue and does require cross-government work. We need to see the Scottish Government use the regulation-making powers it has to reduce the harm of environmental vapes, and we need to make sure we take action quickly. This current delay means that we're already seeing products evolve to try to get round being disposable or single-use, and this puts us on the back foot again. Yes, getting it right is important, but we need to do it quickly because these are doing harm to health and the environment every day. We're seeing a rise in disposable electronics, and we need to make sure that we take serious action. I seek assurances today from the Minister that the Scottish Government will seek a timeline for the introduction of a ban on single-use vapes as soon as possible after the 4th of July. If that approach isn't forthcoming, will it seek to introduce legislation here? And that the Scottish Government will use their existing powers to reduce the harm and reduce the litter by putting disposable vapes behind cover, as with conventional cigarettes. Thanks.
Thank you, and I call Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scottish Labour welcomes Amendment 71 in the name of Gillian Mackay, and we also note that Action to Protect Rural Scotland strongly support this amendment. I think adding to the bill that Ministers may, by regulations, establish a take-back scheme for single-use vaping products is a really welcome addition, and I hope that we can all support this tonight. I think all of us, through conversations locally, know that tackling the blight of single-use vapes on our communities is really important. It certainly is raised with me in terms of the litter people see in local parks, and I have to say that young people, especially in our primary schools, are sometimes the most vocal about it. In terms of other work that's been undertaken both by the Scottish Government, UK Government, and the work that's clearly been championed by Gillian Mackay, I think we certainly would welcome that as we try to achieve a ban on single-use vapes. Although the Prime Minister's last-minute gamble on an early election has obviously delayed that being implemented. But I do hope that whatever happens after the election on the 4th of July, that we do see cross-party working and cross-government working on this. And I think in terms of short-term and longer-term action, I think, working towards the medium-longer term, certainly a ban would be ideal. If that can be done at a UK-wide level, great. If we need to drive that forward in Scotland, let's do that. But we need to send a strong signal that this kind of littering is not acceptable. And I think the point that Gillian Mackay made in response to Edward Mountain's question about making it easier for people in terms of take-back, I think that's a really important point. We've seen in my area recently, and I think South Lanarkshire Council should be commended, they've now brought in an appointment system for the local amenity sites. But we're seeing for those who do have cars, there is a high demand, and now we have an appointment system to try and manage some of the conflict around that space. But I think the point is about making it as easy as possible for individuals, and if people are consuming a product and going back to a particular retailer, then I think that take-back model is really appropriate. So I just wanted to strongly support the amendment in Gillian Mackay's name.
Thank you. And I call Graham Simpson.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I just want to comment on both the amendments. First of all, Sarah Boyack's amendment, which I think builds on what I attempted to do at stage 2, which was to exempt compostable materials from these regulations, and that bizarrely people didn't buy that. They didn't go for it. I would have thought that if something is compostable, in other words, it can break down naturally, then you shouldn't be applying a charge to such materials. So Sarah Boyack has had another go at that. She's been a little bit more technical than I was, but I'm very happy to support that, just as I'm happy to support Gillian Mackay's amendment on introducing a take-back scheme for single-use vapes. They are a problem. Littering of these products are an issue, so I think it's definitely worth exploring. She does raise the issue of the Internal Market Act. We'd have to get that right before doing this, but I think it's definitely worth exploring.
Thank you. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I understand the purpose behind Sarah Boyack's Amendment 101 in the same way that I understood Graham Simpson's motivations at stage 2, which would create a specific exemption from charges for single-use items which, in the case of Sarah Boyack's amendment here, are made from polylactic acid or crystallised polylactic acid, which are made from plant-based matter. However, I don't agree that this amendment would be beneficial to the aims of the charge, and the reasons are one that I'll set out again that I mentioned in stage 2. Even when a single-use item is biodegradable or compostable, they're still operating on a linear economy model designed to be used and discarded using precious resources for ease and convenience. And to Mark Ruskell's point, biodegradable items often need a specific environment to biodegrade, and they're often used as on the go. They're just as likely to be littered. And they will contribute to the litter that's on our streets, because they're not going to dissolve or biodegrade overnight. If they're littered, even if they biodegrade more quickly than plastic, they're still going to cause harm to wildlife and livestock. So it's not just a case of basically looking at the material that cups are made from. It's actually looking at the whole point of the charge was to discourage the use of these throwaway disposable items in the first place. It's to trigger behaviour change as part of the wider suite of measures towards reuse. But I reassure Ms Boyack that it doesn't rule out the possibility of appropriate exemptions. It's an enabling power. Exemptions can be set out in secondary legislation. We can have this debate again more thoroughly, having a process of consultation and impact assessments, as you would expect on something around single-use items and a charge associated with them. Moving on to Amendment 71. I fully support the intent of Gillian Mackay's amendment, and that's why measures have already been taken to tackle the environmental impact of single-use vapes. I mean, 10 years, we didn't see these things in our streets, and now everywhere you look, once you see one, you see 10. You know, they're absolutely everywhere. On the 10th of June, though, this year, regulations banning the sale and supply of single-use vapes in Scotland were laid in Parliament, and the proposed ban is been brought forward under Section 140 of the Environmental Protection Act 1990. The UK Government, Welsh Government and Northern Irish Executive have also confirmed their intention to legislate for the ban, with an agreed coming into force date of the 1st of April 2025. Now, at the present time, the upcoming general election is not expected to impact on our ability to meet this common coming into force date. We were the first government to commit to taking action on single-use vapes and fulfilled our 2023 programme for government commitment to consult on measures to tackle the environmental impact of single-use vapes. And this has had cross-party support across the Parliament, and indeed I see that today as well. So I hope that will continue as we ensure this important legislation is passed upon return from the summer recess. With regard to sort of like take-back issues, the waste, electrical and electronic equipment regulations already require that retailers selling single-use vapes in store or online must meet specific obligations for their collection and recycling. Now, previously, small and online retailers could meet their obligations by paying into a distributor take-back scheme. But from the 1st of January this year, all vape sales were excluded from that distributor take-back scheme, which means that all stores selling vapes are now required to provide that in-store take-back. So that's actually supposed to be happening now. So with the greatest respect to Gillian Mackay, who I know has campaigned on this issue, I don't see that these amendments actually, it's necessary to support these amendments, because everything that she wants is going to happen or is already happening. And I'll take Gillian Mackay.
Gillian Mackay.
I thank the Minister for taking the intervention. Does she agree that more needs to actually be done on the enforcement side of things? I'm sure many members around the chamber will go into their local supermarket and many local shops, and actually there are no obvious take-back places under schemes that we currently have. So they're clearly not working in certain places, or certain retailers are not adhering to them, and there is actually more that we could do despite well-intentioned and good schemes being there in the first place.
Minister.
The very fact that I'm explaining about the distributor take-back obligations, and that none of us seem to be aware that they exist or have seen any signage in any of our local corner shops or in any of the supermarkets, means that the retailers are not doing enough. Do they know their obligations? If they don't know their obligations, then it's what's happening to enforce them. But what are they doing to actually communicate with their customers that they take back the empty vapes? And I think that's a very good point made by Gillian Mackay, but I'll leave my remarks there, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, and I call Sarah Boyack to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 101.
Well, I think it has been a good discussion. I'm disappointed the Government can't accept my amendment today, but I I'm glad that the Minister will at least look at the issue going forward in terms of the regulations. But I just wanted to support local businesses who are trying to do the right thing and are producing products that I think are innovative and are beneficial. I think the points also made by Monica Lennon and Gillian Martin about making it easier for people to do the right thing are absolutely critical. And I come back to the very last point the Minister made about communications. I think there's going to be something particularly for the Government to think about in terms of whatever this bill looks like at the end. How do we communicate it with people so that they understand what this legislation does, what it could do and how it will impact businesses and communities? Because I think there's not been enough focus on the communications of this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Can I confirm, Ms Boyack, whether you intend to press or withdraw Amendment 101? Absolutely press Amendment 101. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 101 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Shona Robertson for a point of order.
Sorry, I had problems connecting again. It would have been no.
Thank you, Ms Robertson. We'll ensure that's recorded. I call Beatrice Wishart for a point of order.
Sorry, my app wouldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. We will ensure that is recorded. I call Alexander Stewart for a point of order.
Thank you, President Officer. My app wouldn't connect. I'd have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. We'll ensure that's recorded.
Point of order.
I can confirm that your vote has been recorded, Mr Balfour. The result of the vote on amendment number 101 in the name of Sarah Boyack is yes 47, no 69. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 8 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with amendment 1. Graham Simpson, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call amendment 9 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with amendment 1. Graham Simpson, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. And I call amendment 71 in the name of Gillian Mackay, already debated with amendment 101. Gillian Mackay, to move or not move?
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Given the assurances from the Minister, I won't move.
Thank you. Yes, you can indeed. Therefore, the question is that Amendment 71 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Alexander Stewart for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's still unable to open, so I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 71 in the name of Gillian Mackay. Oh, bear with me, colleagues. The result of the vote on amendment number 71 in the name of Gillian Mackay is yes 49, no 65. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We move to Group 9. A point of order, Jamie Hepburn.
I just wonder, for the public record, it wasn't entirely clear who moved the last amendment, and I just wonder if we could get clarity on that, Presiding Officer.
The amendment was moved by Douglas Lumsden. Thank you. We move to Group 9, fly tipping and removal of unlawfully deposited waste. I call Amendment 54 in the name of Edward Mountain, grouped with Amendments 55, 85 and 86. Edward Mountain to move Amendment 54 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And before I go any further, I'd just like to remind members of my declaration of interest that I own a farm in Murray. And to be clear, like most farmers across Scotland and landowners across Scotland, we've all suffered from people throwing stuff onto the farm. In the last few weeks, it was 30 tyres and a rolled-up mattress. Prior to that, it's been deep freezers full of food, it's been asbestos, it's been oil, it's been a combination of things, including hypodermic needles scattered around along with nails in fields of cattle. I don't think there's any excuse at all for fly tipping, and I think fly tipping is a blight that covers Scotland. But there are people out there who make a lot of money from it by going round and collecting waste, saying they're going to dispose of it properly, and doing no such thing but finding the closest farm or gateway that they could find and throwing the stuff in it. That's just not acceptable, which is why my two amendments, 54 and 55, seek to do one thing only, and that's increase the level of fines, putting it up to £5,000 if you are fly tipping. It doesn't have to be £5,000, but it can be £5,000. Now, somebody will sit here, and the Minister has said before, when we were at the committee meeting, that that was too much money. But I remind this Parliament that it was in the last session that we agreed that for killing mountain hares, the maximum prison sentence should be 5 years and an unlimited fine. But it appears that £5,000 for fly tipping, which could kill more wildlife than anything else, is completely unacceptable. So I think we ought to consider carefully what our priorities are and whether we think it's right that people go around the countryside causing a blight on Scotland, which is not making it attractive for tourists to come up here. Now, I would like to pay credit to the Minister for her amendment, 85, which is in this group, and I take actual pleasure in seeing that the Minister's listened to my colleague Murdo Fraser and all he's been doing in relation to fly tipping, because usually what happens if fly tipping is found is you get what I called a snotogram from SEPA or some such organisation telling you to remove the rubbish, although you didn't dump it. And it came at the landowner's expense or the tenant's expense to move that rubbish. Gillian Martin's amendment seeks to stop that, and I think that's entirely right. And I think if Murdo Fraser sees Gillian Martin's amendment pass, he will be happy not to move his amendment, but I could be putting words into his mouth. But I would like to commend, Presiding Officer, both of those members for working together to come up with something to make it more workable, that those who are plagued by, yes, I will just in a minute, those plagued by fly tipping aren't the ones who have to pay for other people's illegal actions. I would give way to the member.
Christine Graham.
Is this thing on yet? I thank Edward Mountain. It will be very brief, but I'm sure he would agree with me that some of the fly tipping is done by commercial organisations which are actually serious organised crime. So it goes beyond the fridge freezer or the mattress, but something much more sinister.
Edward Mountain.
I absolutely do agree with Christine Graham with that comment, which is why the fine needs to be sensible enough to stop them doing it in the future. You know, £1,000 to organised crime is just really a small change. £5,000 might make them sit up. Yep. Therefore, happy to listen to the arguments, but I want to move that amendment, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call the Minister to speak to Amendment 85 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I firmly agree with the importance of having a strong and effective enforcement regime to deter and tackle fly tipping. The Scottish Government, however, does not support Amendments 54 and 55 from Edward Mountain. I'm going to set out why, though, because I think it's important to understand the broad range of activities that can be classed as fly tipping. It could be from leaving a single household item in the street to abandoning tons of waste in a country lane or on agricultural land. Very different offences, and there's already a range of penalties available to be used in these very different scenarios. So a fixed penalty notice is an alternative to prosecution and should be used to address lower level incidences of fly tipping, appropriately addressed by a sanction that does not result in a criminal conviction. So a £5,000 FPN would not be a proportionate amount for these less serious offences. Now, Christine Graham intervened on Mr Mountain to point to the organised crime and the very serious instances of fly tipping that occur. These are not addressed by way of an FPN. They are reported to the Procurator Fiscal for prosecution or, where appropriate and in accordance with the Lord Advocate's guidance, addressed by way of a civil sanctions imposed by SEPA, which could include the imposition of a variable I'll finish this point, Mr Mountain, which could include the imposition of a variable monetary penalty of up to £40,000. And I'll take Mr Mountain now.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Minister for giving way. I think the real issue is that whilst there may be penalties involved, how many councils across Scotland have ever prosecuted anyone for fly tipping? I'll give you a starter. Murray's done none.
Minister.
Well, I'm going to set out some of the other actions. I don't have that information in front of me, but I take the point, and the point is made that Mr Mountain doesn't feel enough has been done to address fly tipping, and hopefully I'm going to be able to give him comfort. And he mentioned that I've put forward amendments that I've listened to Mr Mountain and Mr Fraser with their arguments at stage 2 with regard to fly tipping. We increased the fixed penalty for fly tipping to £500 in January this year, and it's now at the maximum level that can currently be set by way of secondary legislation. And the bill was amended at stage 2 as a result of Mr Fraser's Amendment 201, which will allow for future increases to a maximum amount not exceeding level 3 in the standard scale, which is currently fixed at £1,000, and for different levels of penalties to be imposed in different circumstances. Now, this is going to ensure that the FPN amount can be increased in the future and remain a proportionate means of addressing less serious incidents of fly tipping as part of the range of options that are available for fly tipping offences. Presiding Officer, I'll move on to talk about Amendments 85 and 86 that relate to Section 59 of the Environmental Protection Act 1990, which provides powers to SEPA and local authorities to address waste deposited in private land where they would otherwise be unable to do so. Amendment 85 is a Scottish Government amendment, but I'd like to thank Murdo Fraser and Edward Mountain for their very constructive contribution to these discussions that have informed its development. I really appreciate the work that they did with me and my officials on that, and I hope this amendment reassures members that we have listened carefully to their views and delivered on our commitment to consider issues that have been raised at earlier stages in the bill. And this includes concerns that were raised during stage 2 on the lack of clarity for private land occupiers with regard to arrangements relating to the unlawful disposal of waste on their land. And the amendment would make 2 changes to Section 59. Firstly, it would insert a requirement that a notice may only be served to an occupier of the land when the authority is satisfied that the occupier deposited or knowingly caused or permitted the deposit of waste, and this will improve clarity in the circumstances when a Section 59 notice can be used. Secondly, it would change the appeals process for Section 59 of the 1990 Act by directing appeals to Scottish ministers rather than through the Sheriff Court system. This approach would be consistent with the approach in a number of other environmental appeals, which are dealt with by the Planning and Environmental Appeals Division, creating a more streamlined and accessible appeals process. Now, overall, I am satisfied that the changes brought about by this amendment will help clarify the use of Section 59 notices for land occupiers and enforcement agencies and ensure that the appeals process is proportionate and accessible. We are committed to provide guidance as noted in the amendment. In respect of Amendment 86, I would thank Murdo Fraser for bringing this amendment forward, and I am reassured that we are aiming to achieve broadly the same objectives with our approach here. Mr Fraser's amendment would have similar effect to the first part of Amendment 85, but would expand the provisions so a notice under subsection 1 could also be issued to the owner of any private land in addition to the occupier of that land. And I'd urge you to support Amendment 85, given the added value of government amendment in terms of the change to the appeals process. I'd ask Mr Fraser not to press in a moment his amendment and support the government's. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Murdo Fraser to speak to Amendment 86 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, what might be an unusual twist, I'd like to bring a degree of consensus to this debate. And can I, first of all, agree with what Edward Mountain had to say about the scourge of fly tipping. As members might be aware, I was preparing a member's bill on this issue, having run a consultation back in 2022. The purpose of that was to improve data collection and publication, adjust the liability both on the generators of waste and on the innocent owners of land on which waste was dumped, and to increase the penalties for offenders. And the consultation responses to my Members' Bill proposal showed very strong support for each one of those measures. And I have had very good engagement with the Scottish Government, and I pay tribute to the Minister currently in charge of the bill for the engagement we've had, indeed to the Minister previously in charge of the bill, Lorna Slater, for the very constructive approach taken by her to these issues. And I was pleased to see the bill as introduced contained a measure to increase the liability on the generator of waste to ensure that this is properly disposed of, dealing with one of the 4 elements in my Members' Bill proposal. In relation to the issue of the level of penalties for fly tipping offences, the Scottish Government increased the maximum fixed penalty from £200 to £500 by secondary legislation. In my view, that did not go far enough, and at stage 2 of the bill, as the Minister outlined, I put forward an amendment to increase the maximum amount at which the fixed penalty could be issued from £500 to £1,000, and I was pleased that was agreed at stage 2. At stage 2, I also put forward an amendment on the issue of data collection, modifying the 1990 Environmental Protection Act, granting power to Scottish ministers to require information from local authorities and the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park Authority in relation to reporting of incidents of unlawful depositing of waste, to allow collation and analysis of data around fly tipping. And again, I was pleased this was agreed by the committee at stage 2. And that then left the final and perhaps the most important element, the issue of liability on the part of the innocent landowner on whose property waste has been dumped, where they did not generate the waste or give permission for its dumping. Because, as Edward Mountain has outlined, under Section 59(1) of the 1990 Act, liability for removal of the waste lies with the occupier or owner of the land, who could face fines if the waste is not removed. And in addition, where an appropriate statutory body, such as the local authority or SEPA, then step in and remove the waste themselves, the cost of removal can be levied to the owner of the land. Now, in my view, this is clearly unfair. It is contrary to natural justice and goes against the polluter pays principle that should underline environmental legislation. And I can think of no other area of public policy where the victim of a crime is held responsible for it and for paying the cost of another's actions. When I consulted on this on my Members' Bill's proposal, 85% of those responding were fully supportive, of the proposal that liability should be removed from the innocent person who had waste deposited on their land, and a further 9% partially supportive. And both the National Farmers Union of Scotland and the Scottish Land and Estates and other representative bodies have been raising this issue over many years. Now, my Amendment 86 amends Section 59, subsection 1 of the 1990 Act to allow an authority only to serve a notice requiring removal of waste where that authority is satisfied that the occupier or owner of the land on which waste is deposited will be required to remove that waste or meet the cost of it, which means the innocent owner of land will no longer be required to meet that cost of removal. And that deals with the concerns that have been raised with me, by farmers and others, and outlined by Edward Mountain just a few moments ago. And I was very pleased to see the Minister's Amendment 85, which essentially says the same as my own amendment, but actually goes further to amend the process of appeal, meaning that those affected by these notices can in the future go to Scottish ministers rather than apply to the court, thus hopefully reducing costs. I am therefore happy to prefer the Minister's Amendment 85 to my own, and therefore should Amendment 85 be agreed by Parliament, it would not be my intention to move Amendment 86. So can I thank the Minister for the engagement we have had on this matter, and for her recognising that this is an injustice which will be put right should her amendment or my amendment be agreed by Parliament today. There is one remaining issue around this that we need to be considered, which is not a legal matter, but one of government policy, which is what happens where waste is deposited on the land of an innocent landowner, and how that is then removed, and who bears that cost. I hope that the Government will consider some sort of funding system to be put in place to ensure that the costs of that removal can be met. I'd be very interested if the Minister has any thoughts on that. Perhaps she could share by intervening on Mr Mountain when he's winding up, for example, or we can deal with that subsequently, but that is an issue that is still to be resolved. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, and I call on Edward Mountain to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 54.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I listened to what Murdo Fraser said, and I'm glad that between him and the Minister they've come up with a solution that will help remove this scourge. There is, of course, a way of funding this removal of the waste by making sure that we find people who deposited it round the countryside in such a cavalier manner, disregarding farmers, disregarding landowners, disregarding tourists and causing a blight on Scotland. I have nothing further to say, but if we don't put a monetary value on this, which is at the same level for, in my mind, what may be a lesser crime, I think we're out of proportion. So I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 54 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 54 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 47, no 69. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 55 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 54. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Not move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call amendment 85 in the name of the Minister, already debated with amendment 54. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. And the question is that amendment 85 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The amendment is agreed. I call amendment 86 in the name of Murdo Fraser, already debated with amendment 54. Murdo Fraser to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call amendment 10 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with amendment 50. Graham Simpson to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Angela Constance for a point of order.
No connection. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Constance. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 10 in the name of Graham Simpson is yes 48, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. And I call amendment 36 in the name of Graham Simpson, already debated with amendment 50. Graham Simpson to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 36 in the name of Graham Simpson is yes 48, no 69. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. And at this point, I will suspend this meeting for a break for 15 minutes, and the division bell will ring to notify members that business is resuming. Thank you.